Some men carry their pain so quietly you never notice the weight until the moment they decide someone else won't carry theirs alone. In a half-empty diner on a frozen November morning, a woman in a wheelchair sat alone with her coffee, wanting nothing more than 5 minutes of peace. Two teenagers decided she deserved something else. Every single person in that room looked away. Every person except one, a mechanic with grease still under his fingernails, a father running on no sleep, a man who had nothing left to lose and somehow still had everything to give. If this is your first time here, hit that like button and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The garage had been losing money since September. Ethan Calloway knew the exact number. Not because he checked the books every morning, which he did, but because the number lived in his chest like a splinter he couldn't reach. $14,231. That was the gap between what Callaway Auto had earned in the third quarter and what it needed to survive into the fourth. His father had built that garage with 30-year-old tools and a second-hand hydraulic lift that still squealed like a wounded animal every time it rose. Raymond Callaway had poured 26 years of his life into that building on the corner of Route 9 and Miller Road, and when he died 18 months ago, quietly, in his sleep, the way men like him tended to go, he'd left it to Ethan with nothing but a signed title and the expectation that his son would figure the rest out. Ethan was still figuring. He pulled his truck into the parking lot of Mel's Roadside Diner at 6:47 in the morning because the alternative was going back to the house and lying awake staring at the ceiling again. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Lying in the dark, listening to the furnace kick on, listening to the pipes settle, listening to his daughter breathe through the baby monitor he still kept on his nightstand, even though Sophie was 8 years old and would be mortified if she knew it was there. Old habits from the years when he'd slept with one eye open in places where the wrong sound meant the last sound. He couldn't quite shake it. The diner's parking lot held 6 cars, including a handicap-accessible van with a ramp lowered to the pavement. Ethan noticed it the way he noticed everything, cataloged it, moved on. He was wearing his work jacket, the dark green canvas one with the sleeve zipper that Sophie had given him for his birthday. She'd picked it out herself, saved up 4 weeks of her lunch money to contribute to the cost, and presented it to him at breakfast with a card that said, in her blocky 7-year-old handwriting, "Dad, for when you get cold in the garage. Love, Sophie." He wore it almost every day. Inside, Mel's smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something faintly sweet, probably the apple turnovers someone's grandmother had been baking in the back since before dawn. The place seated maybe 30 people. Right now it held 12, scattered at booths and counter stools in the particular isolation of early morning regulars who all understood the unspoken agreement. You don't bother me, I don't bother you, and we all pretend this is enough. Ethan took a booth near the window, one that gave him a clear sightline to the door. Another habit. He ordered black coffee and the 2-egg breakfast because it was the cheapest thing on the menu that would actually hold him until noon, and he spread the garage's bank statements across the table and started going through them for the 4th time that week, as if the numbers might have changed overnight. They hadn't. He was circling a supplier charge he didn't recognize when he heard the bell above the door chime. He glanced up. The woman who came in was maybe 30, dark-haired, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a cream-colored blouse, the kind of clothes that said she hadn't bought them at the mall in Hargrove. She moved her wheelchair with practiced efficiency, navigating the narrow space between the hostess stand and the first row of booths with the quiet competence of someone who had long since stopped waiting for other people to make room. She found a table near the back, one of the low cafe-style ones, and parked herself at it and pulled out her phone without looking around for approval or acknowledgement. Just a woman getting breakfast before her day started. Nobody really looked at her. Ethan looked back at his bank statements. His coffee arrived. He drank it too fast and burned the side of his tongue, which was how his mornings usually went. The diner filled slightly over the next 20 minutes. A couple of contractors, a woman with scrubs who was clearly coming off a night shift, 2 older men at the counter who were arguing about the county tax assessment. The bell above the door chimed again, and Ethan looked up automatically. 2 teenagers. Boys. Maybe 16 or 17, wearing the particular kind of expensive streetwear that cost $300 and was specifically designed to look like it cost nothing. They came in loud, already mid-conversation, one of them laughing at something on his phone. They found a booth 3 tables from the woman in the wheelchair, and for a few minutes they just ordered and talked and existed with the careless loudness of boys who had never once had to be quiet because their lives depended on it. Ethan went back to his numbers. He heard it start as a kind of snickering, low enough to be deniable. Then one of the boys said, loud enough to carry, "Yo, how do you even get a table? Doesn't the chair go with the food?" The other one laughed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on the paper. The woman, he didn't know her name yet, didn't look up from her phone. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted. A practiced stillness. The kind of stillness that said, "I've been here before. I know how to wait this out." Seriously, though, the first boy continued, apparently deciding that the silence meant encouragement. Does she need someone to push her to the bathroom, or what? People in the diner heard it. Ethan could tell. The way the contractors suddenly became very interested in their plates, the way the woman in scrubs looked at the wall, the way the 2 older men at the counter exchanged a glance and then looked away. That collective look of people who had decided without discussion that this wasn't their problem. Ethan put his pen down. He told himself to stay out of it. He had enough. He had a garage drowning in debt, and a daughter who needed new winter boots, and a supplier invoice he still couldn't account for. He was 38 years old, and he was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. And the last time he'd put himself between trouble and a stranger, it had taken 3 months of physical therapy to straighten his left wrist again. He told himself, not your circus. He picked his pen back up. Maybe she parks herself there because people assume she can't move fast enough to get away. The boy said it like it was clever. His friend was practically falling out of the booth. The woman finally looked up from her phone. She looked at the 2 boys with an expression that Ethan couldn't quite read from his angle. Not anger, not hurt exactly, something more complicated than either. She said very calmly, "I'd appreciate it if you kept your conversation between the 2 of you." This was apparently exactly the wrong thing to say. "Oh, she talks," the first boy announced to no one in particular. "I wasn't sure. Figured the chair might have gotten the voice box too." His friend made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, something crueler than that. The woman turned back to her phone. Ethan could see from where he sat that her hand had tightened slightly on the edge of the table. He got up. He didn't think about it the way most people describe thinking about things. Weighing options, running calculations. It wasn't that. It was simpler and older than that. Something in him crossed a line, and then he was standing, and he was moving, and his coffee was still on the table getting cold. He stopped at their booth. Both boys looked up at him. He was 6'1", and he'd spent the better part of 15 years keeping himself in the kind of shape where his body was a working tool, and he hadn't entirely let that go since transitioning out. He wasn't huge, but he was solid in the way of men who've done hard things and absorbed the cost of them into their frame. He stood there with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at both of them without any particular expression. "You need to stop," he said. The first boy leaned back in the booth, doing the thing teenagers do when they've decided an adult is to be mocked rather than respected. "We weren't talking to you, man." "I know you weren't." Ethan kept his voice flat. "I'm talking to you. Mind your business." "I'm minding the business in front of me." There was a beat. The other boy, the quieter one, had gone slightly still in the way of people who've suddenly recalculated where they are in a situation. The first one hadn't gotten there yet. "What are you going to do about it?" he said. Ethan had been in rooms where that question was asked with a knife in the asker's hand. He had been in rooms where the correct answer to that question was to shoot first. He had learned a long time ago that the question itself was almost never as dangerous as the circumstances around it, and that the boys sitting in front of him were 16 years old in a diner in November, and the correct response was not anything close to what he was once trained for. He pulled a chair from the nearest empty table and sat down in it, directly beside their booth, close enough that it required them to look at him straight on. "I'm going to sit here," he said, "and you're going to keep your mouths shut for the rest of your breakfast, or I'm going to call your parents. Not the police, your parents. And I'm going to describe in detail what their kid said to a woman who was trying to eat breakfast this morning. I'm going to describe the way you said it and the way you laughed. And when I'm done describing it, I'm going to ask them if this is something they knew about or something that would surprise them. A silence. That's it? The first boy said, but the edge in his voice had dulled. That's it, Ethan agreed. Unless you'd prefer the other version. What's the other version? Ethan looked at him steadily. You don't want the other version. He said it without heat, without the kind of performed menace that boys that age were trained by movies to recognize and mock. He said it the way you say something that's simply true, the way you describe the weather or the time. And the boy looked at him for a long moment, and then looked at his friend, and then looked at the table. Whatever, he muttered. Good choice, Ethan said. He sat there another 30 seconds, just to make sure the temperature had actually dropped. Then he stood, moved the chair back to its original table. He lined it up carefully, the way Mel's staff had left it, and walked back to his booth. His eggs had arrived while he was gone. They were slightly cold. He ate them anyway. For a while after that, the diner went back to its regular sounds. The contractors talked. The woman in scrubs left. The two old men at the counter returned to the tax assessment dispute. The teenagers ate their food in tight, sullen silence and then left without looking at anyone. The whole thing had taken less than 4 minutes. Ethan was reviewing the supplier invoice again when he noticed the woman in the wheelchair looking at him. Not obviously. Just a glance, the kind that said she'd been trying to decide something. He met her eyes. She sat across 3 tables and the general ambient noise of the diner. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. Most people were just going to let it go. He shrugged. I noticed. She considered this. Then, can I buy you a coffee? Your original one's probably cold. He thought about saying no. He had the bank statement still spread out in front of him and a 9 o'clock appointment with a customer's transmission, and Sophie's school had sent home a permission slip yesterday that needed to be signed and returned. He had 30 things between here and a conversation with a stranger. He said, Sure. She navigated her wheelchair to his table. There was space. He'd taken the booth with enough room for exactly this reason, a habit from years of always positioning himself where options existed, and she sat across from him and held out her hand. Victoria Sterling. He shook it. Ethan Callaway. Her handshake was firm and direct, no hesitation in it. She had dark eyes that were sharp in the way of someone who makes fast assessments for a living. She looked at the bank statements on the table, then at him, then waited to see what he'd do with the fact that she'd seen them. He didn't move the papers. Auto garage, he said. Third quarter was rough. She didn't offer anything hollow about it. He appreciated that. How long have you had it? 18 months on paper, my whole life before that. He folded one of the statements. My father built it. He died and left it to me. And you kept it running? Trying to. He paused. What do you do? Technology company. She said it without flourish, the way he'd said auto garage. He'd find out later what that actually meant. The company, the scope of it, the kind of numbers that moved through it in a single fiscal quarter. Right now, she was just a woman who'd been taking her breakfast alone and hadn't asked for any of what had just happened to her. And there was something in the quiet steadiness of her face that reminded him, oddly, of the guys he'd served with who were the most capable. Not the ones who talked the loudest or moved the fastest, but the ones who had already absorbed the worst thing that could happen to them, and were still here, still functioning, still clear-eyed. You do that a lot? She asked. Step into things that aren't yours to step into? He thought about it honestly. I used to do it for a living, he said. I'm out of practice deciding when not to. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but the edge of one. What branch? Navy. SEAL? He tilted his head, neither confirming nor denying, and she read the answer in that anyway. My brother tried out, she said. Didn't make it past the second week. He said the hardest part was learning to care about the person next to you more than your own discomfort. That's a pretty accurate description, Ethan said. She was quiet a moment. Their coffee arrived. The waitress, a stout woman named Dory, who'd been at Mel's for as long as anyone could remember, topped Ethan's cup off and set a fresh one in front of Victoria without being asked. Small dignities. I've been taking that breakfast alone for about 4 months, Victoria said. She held her cup in both hands. That's the third time something like that has happened. Each time people watched and didn't say anything. She paused. Each time I told myself I didn't care. Did you? Ethan asked. She looked at him directly. Yeah, she said. I did. A little. He nodded, didn't say anything. Some things didn't require commentary. You have kids? She asked. He pulled out his phone and turned it to show her the lock screen. Sophie at the state fair in August, caught mid-laugh on the Ferris wheel, missing one of her front teeth, her dark hair horizontal in the wind. He'd taken the picture without her knowing, and it had come out better than any posed photo he'd ever managed. Victoria looked at it for a moment. How old? 8. He turned the phone back. Going on 35. Just you? Just me. He didn't say it with self-pity, which she seemed to register. Her mom left when Sophie was 2. Better for everyone the way things worked out. It was a complicated sentence. He let it sit. My accident was 3 years ago, Victoria said. Not out of nowhere. The conversation had been moving toward it the way water moves. Car accident. I was 27. I'd been running the company for 14 months. She turned her cup slightly on the table. Everyone told me to take a break, step back, recover. I was back at my desk in 6 weeks. I believe that, Ethan said. I had to. If I wasn't there every day, being completely present and completely functional, the board would have used the accident as an opportunity. She said it without bitterness, just as a fact, the way she might describe the mechanics of a problem she'd already solved. The world has a way of using your weakness against you if you let it. Yeah, Ethan agreed. It does. Outside, a salt truck went past on Route 9, its orange light blinking in the gray morning. The contractors paid their bill and left, letting in a gust of cold air that made the nearest candle in its little glass holder gutter and catch. Ethan looked at the bank statements in front of him and thought about the transmission he had to pull at 9 and the permission slip in his jacket pocket and Sophie's winter boots. He thought about his father's handwriting on the wall calendar still hanging in the garage office, the one from 2 years ago that neither he nor Carla, the part-time bookkeeper, had been able to bring themselves to take down. I don't know if the garage is going to make it, he said. He didn't know why he said it. He hadn't said it out loud to anyone, not to Carla, not to the bank, not to his friend Marcus, who'd been offering to lend him money for 3 months. The words just came out, flat and factual, like he was reading them off one of the statements. Victoria looked at him without the particular expression people usually arranged when someone shared something difficult, the performed concern, the small incline of the head. She said, "What's wrong with it?" He blinked slightly. What? The garage. What's the specific problem? He looked at her. You want the list? Start with the biggest one. He pulled the bank statement toward her and pointed to a line. Equipment. We've been running on my father's tools. Some of them are older than I am. The lift needs to be replaced. The alignment rack has a calibration drift that's gotten worse every quarter, and customers are starting to notice. But new equipment is $50,000, $60,000 I don't have. And the cash flow? He pointed to another line. Better than it looks, actually. Customer base is solid. We've got relationships in this county going back 25 years because my father built them. The problem isn't customers. It's that every repair I could take in, I'm turning away or subcontracting because I don't have the equipment to do it in-house. Lost 12 transmission jobs last quarter. Victoria studied the paper for a moment. He noticed she read numbers the way he read terrain, quickly, not needing to go back. And this? She indicated the unidentified supplier charge. He exhaled. Still trying to figure that one out. Who handles your books? Carla. She's been with us for 12 years. She's good, but she's working 20 hours a week, and it's gotten complicated. Victoria sat back slightly and held her coffee cup again. She was thinking in a way that was visible, not concealed. He could watch her moving through something, sorting variables. It was interesting to watch. My company does a lot of work in accessibility technology, she said. Assistive devices, adaptive infrastructure, software platforms for people with mobility limitations. We have 43 employees and we're growing. She looked at him. We also have an entire fleet of company vehicles that need maintenance contracts. Right now we're using a chain service center 40 minutes away. Ethan waited. I'm not making you an offer, she said. I just think that's a relevant piece of information. Noted, he said. She looked at Sophie's face, still visible through the cracked phone screen on the table between them. Is there anything you're sure about? She asked. About the garage? He thought about it. He thought about the regular customers who still drove past the new Quick Lube franchise that had opened on Route 12 because they trusted him. He thought about the woman who'd brought in her late husband's 1987 pickup and watched Ethan spend 2 extra hours getting the original radio working again without charging her for the time. He thought about what his father had built and why people kept coming back. The work, he said. I'm sure about the work. Victoria Sterling nodded slowly. She set her coffee cup down and looked at him for a moment with that dark-eyed directness that he'd noticed immediately, before he even knew her name. That's usually the last thing that survives, she said, when everything else falls apart. She didn't say anything else about it. Neither did he. They sat there a few more minutes, finishing their coffee as the diner moved around them, ordinary and unhurried and alive in the way that ordinary things are when you're paying attention to them. The morning light was starting to warm through the window. On Route 9, a car went past with Christmas lights already strung across its roof rack, blinking red and green, too early and somehow exactly right. Ethan paid for his breakfast, folded his bank statements, and pulled on Sophie's jacket. Victoria was already on her phone when he pushed back from the table. Thanks for the coffee, he said. She looked up. Thanks for not looking the other way. He nodded once and walked out into the cold. He didn't think he'd see her again. He was wrong about that. The 9 o'clock transmission job ran long. It wasn't supposed to. A 2019 F-150 routine rebuild. Ethan had done the same job maybe 60 times in his life. But when he pulled the unit and cracked it open, he found a cracked planetary gear that the customer hadn't mentioned and probably hadn't known about, which meant the estimate was wrong, and the conversation he was about to have with the owner was going to be unpleasant. That was the part of the job nobody romanticized. Not the grease, or the cold floor, or the hours, but the moment when you had to call someone and explain that what they'd budgeted for had doubled, and watch them decide whether to trust you or accuse you of manufacturing the problem. He made the call from the office, standing at his father's old metal desk with the cracked vinyl chair behind it that he kept meaning to replace. I'm going to need to see pictures, the customer said. I'll send them right now, Ethan said. He already had them on his phone. He'd taken them before he'd even picked up to dial, because that was how you handled it. You took away every reason for doubt before the doubt had a chance to form. He sent the pictures while the man was still on the line. Heard him open them, heard the pause. Okay, the man said. How soon can you have it done? Tomorrow afternoon if the part comes in on the morning run. Day after at the latest. All right. Another pause. You could have just charged me and not said anything. My last place did that. I'm aware, Ethan said. He didn't say anything else about it. After he hung up, he stood there a moment in the office. The wall calendar was still up. His father's handwriting on the March squares from 2 years ago, service reminders for regular customers Raymond had tracked by hand because he'd never trusted the scheduling software Ethan had installed. Kowalski, oil/filter. Berman, tires rotated. Mrs. Patel, check the damn brakes she keeps ignoring. That last one with a small underline for emphasis. Ethan left the calendar where it was and went back to the shop floor. Carla arrived at 10, unwinding a scarf the color of rust and dropping her bag on the chair by the parts counter. She was 54, had worked for Raymond for 12 years before Ethan inherited the place, and possessed the particular quality of a person who had seen an operation at its best and was quietly committed to keeping it from becoming something worse. She didn't say much. She brought good coffee in a thermos, and she caught errors in the books before they compounded, and she'd cried exactly once in front of Ethan, on the day they'd closed the garage for Raymond's funeral, and then never again. That supplier charge, Ethan said without preamble, crossing to where she was booting up the laptop. She already had the folder open. I found it last night. It's a duplicate billing from Hendricks Parts. They ran the July invoice twice. I called them. They're issuing a credit. How much? $840. Not enough to change anything material. But it was $840, and in the current landscape of Callaway Auto, every number had weight. Good catch, he said. I caught it 3 weeks ago, she said. I kept waiting for the credit to appear. It didn't, so I called. She said it without accusation, just sequentially, the way events had happened. He nodded. Thanks, Carla. She poured coffee from her thermos into a mug that said World's Okayest Mechanic, a gift from Sophie 2 Christmases ago, and settled into the chair and started on the receivables without another word. Ethan went back to the F-150. He worked through lunch because he always did, eating half a sandwich over the hood of a Civic he was prepping for a brake job, and by 2 in the afternoon the shop had found its rhythm. The compressor cycling, the radio playing something country from the station in Hargrove that he kept on because his father had kept it on, the particular smell of oil and cold concrete that had been the ambient condition of his entire childhood. He'd grown up in this building, done homework at that desk, fallen asleep on the old couch in the break room more times than he could count while Raymond worked the late jobs. His phone buzzed at 2:17 with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. He had grease on both hands and a caliper bolt that was being uncooperative, and he was already behind on the afternoon schedule. He answered it. Mr. Calloway. A woman's voice, professional, clipped. My name is Dana Rice. I'm the executive assistant to Victoria Sterling at Sterling Adaptive Technologies. Ms. Sterling asked me to reach out and schedule a call between the two of you at your earliest convenience. Ethan set down the caliper. He looked at his hands. He looked at the Civic. She left pretty fast this morning, he said. Yes, she had a 9 o'clock board meeting. A brief pause. She described your conversation as, and I'm quoting directly here, interesting. That's not a word she uses loosely. He didn't know what to do with that exactly. What does she want to talk about? I believe she'd prefer to discuss that directly with you. Right. He thought for a moment. I've got a pickup at 4 and a parts delivery coming at 5:30. Can she do 6? 6 works. I'll send a calendar confirmation to whatever email you'd like. He gave her the garage email, the one with the Callaway Auto domain his father had set up in 2009 and which still had Raymond's name in the welcome message, and hung up. Carla appeared at the doorway of the shop, mug in hand, looking at him with the particular expression she used when she was pretending not to have heard something. Sterling Adaptive Technologies, she said. You heard that. The shop is 40 feet wide, Ethan. Yes, I heard it. She took a sip of her coffee. That's a real company. I know. I mean, a real company. I looked them up once when I was reading about that new bus fleet the county was considering. They make the ramp systems and the adaptive driving controls. They've got something like $200 million in annual revenue. She paused. She came into Mel's this morning? She did. Carla looked at him steadily for another moment. And? And I'll tell you if there's anything to tell. He picked up the caliper bolt again. Can you pull the Sterling account and see if they have any existing vendor relationships in automotive? Carla went to do that. Ethan went back to the brake job. Yeah. The call happened at 6:10 because Victoria's previous meeting ran over, which her assistant communicated via text at 5:58 with an apology that was businesslike and direct and not excessive. Ethan was in the office with the door closed, the shop quiet and locked. Carla gone home an hour ago. He had a glass of water on the desk because he hadn't had time for dinner, and he was trying to approximate something. Sorry about the delay, Victoria said when she came on. No preamble beyond that. Not a problem, Ethan said. How was the board meeting? A brief pause, like the question surprised her. Long. Productive, mostly. One of my board members spent 40 minutes arguing for a pivot I'd already rejected 6 months ago, so we had to go through the whole thing again. Did he change your mind? No? Then it was mostly a waste of 40 minutes. That's roughly what I told him. He could hear something in her voice, not quite amusement, but the edge of it. Mr. Calloway. Ethan. Ethan, I want to be straightforward with you about why I'm calling. I'd appreciate that. This morning you showed me your third quarter statements without any particular hesitation, not because you wanted sympathy, but because you were trying to solve a problem and I'd asked a direct question. Right. That's not how most people operate. Most people hide the numbers until they have no choice, and then they present them as better than they are. She paused. I looked at what you showed me. The business isn't failing because of bad management or bad product. It's failing because of undercapitalization and insufficient equipment. Those are solvable problems. Ethan was quiet a moment. What are you saying? I'm saying I have a fleet of 41 company vehicles that need consistent, high-quality maintenance service and currently travel 40 minutes each way to a chain provider who I don't think is giving us particularly good value. She let that sit. I'm also saying that I looked up your garage this afternoon. Your customer reviews are excellent. You have a 4.9 rating on 112 reviews, and the two that aren't 5 stars are both complaints about wait times, not work quality. Busiest period we ever had, Ethan said. We were short-staffed. I know, I read the responses you wrote to both of them. Another pause. You apologized and explained the staffing situation and offered to discount their next service. That's not something a person does unless they actually care about the reputation. Ethan looked at his father's calendar on the wall. It was his garage for a long time before it was mine, he said. I'm not going to be the one who lets the name mean less than it did. Victoria was quiet on the other end for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly different. Not softer exactly, but with less of the professional briskness, more of the woman who'd been sitting alone at that table in Mel's. I want to meet with you properly, she said. Not a phone call. A real meeting. You, me, your books, a clear table. I have some ideas I'd like to walk through, and I want to see the garage. When? Thursday morning works for me if it works for you. Ethan thought about Thursday. He had a full morning, actually. A scheduled oil service rush he'd been booking since October, the bread and butter work that paid the smaller bills. He thought about saying later in the week. Thursday works, he said. 8 o'clock? 8 is fine. I'll bring coffee. He almost said you don't have to do that, and then didn't, because it would have been the performative kind of refusal that nobody meant. Thanks, he said instead. He drove home in the dark with the heat running and the radio off, thinking about a woman he'd met 6 hours ago and the particular qualities she had of making you feel like the conversation was happening at full speed rather than with the usual half attention people gave to small talk. He thought about the way she'd looked at the bank statements, not with pity, not with the particular helpless sympathy of someone who doesn't know numbers, but with the focused attention of someone reading a problem she'd seen variations of before. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a minute before going in. The house was a 2-bedroom ranch he'd bought from his father's estate at fair market value, a decision that had confused the bank and his cousin both. On 1/3 of an acre with a maple tree in the front yard that turned red every October, and which Sophie had named Gerald when she was 4 and still referred to by name. The lights were on in the kitchen window. His neighbor Janet was inside, visible as a blurred shape moving past the glass. Janet had 3 kids of her own and watched Sophie on the late nights, an arrangement that Ethan paid for in cash, and also in the form of changing all the light bulbs in her house twice a year and keeping her cars maintained at 0 charge. He went in through the side door. Sophie was at the kitchen table with a worksheet, pencil moving. She was wearing the pajamas with the small foxes on them that she'd outgrown slightly. The cuffs were up past her ankles, and her hair was in the kind of loose braid that she did herself now, lopsided and somehow charming. She looked up when he came in. You're late, she said. I know. He dropped his keys on the hook. How was school? Caleb M. put a fake spider in Grace's cubby, and she actually screamed. She said it with the particular contained delight of someone reporting news they find genuinely satisfying. Mrs. Hooper made him sit in the reading corner for the whole afternoon. Sounds fair. The spider was like this big. She held her thumb and finger about 2 inches apart. It wasn't even a good fake spider. Commitment matters, Ethan said. Janet gathered her things and gave him a look that meant she ate dinner. She brushed her teeth. She's fine all without words. They'd worked out a language over 3 years. And slipped out the side door with a wave. Ethan sat at the table across from Sophie while she finished the worksheet. Multiplication. She was solid on the 4s and 5s, working through the 7s with the particular expression she made when something was requiring full effort. Lower lip pushed out, slightly to the left. 7 times 8, she muttered. Don't tell her, Ethan said to no one. I know it, Sophie said, irritated. It's 56. I was just saying it. Okay. 7 times 9. Don't. 63. I know them, Dad. I'm just going through them. He watched her finish the sheet. She had her mother's jawline, but the rest of her came from his side. The dark eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was listening, the way she went quiet when she was upset instead of loud. He'd worried about that quality when she was smaller, the quietness. His therapist, the one he'd seen for 8 months after leaving the service, had told him that quiet children often got less of what they needed because they were easier to overlook. He'd worked hard at not overlooking Sophie. "Dad?" she said, capping her pencil. "Yeah." "If the garage closes—" She stopped, started again. "I heard you talking to Marcus on the phone last week about money." He looked at her. 8 years old with her lopsided braid and her outgrown fox pajamas, and she'd been carrying that. "The garage isn't closing," he said, "but Marcus said—" "Marcus worries. That's what Marcus does." He leaned forward on the table. "I'm working on it, Soph. Something came up today that might help. I don't know yet, but I'm working on it." She looked at him in the way children do when they're deciding whether to believe something. Not naively, not cynically, but with the genuine and serious attention of someone who understands that what they decide will affect how the next weeks feel. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. She put the worksheet in her folder and stood up. "Can I watch one episode?" "One." She went to the living room. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment longer in the quiet, in the small house with the maple tree out front, and he thought about $56,000 in equipment debt and a woman who read numbers the way a soldier reads terrain, and whether those two things would intersect into anything real. Thursday arrived under 3 inches of overnight snow that Ethan was scraping off the shop's lot at 7:15, breath coming in clouds, when the white Tesla SUV pulled in at 7:59. It was equipped with adaptive hand controls. He noticed that, before anything else, the way the steering column was modified, the floor cleared of foot pedals. He noticed it the way he noticed the good work, clean installation, properly integrated. Someone who knew what they were doing had fitted that vehicle. Victoria emerged via a side-loading lift that deployed automatically, smooth and quiet. She was in a different jacket today, navy blue, more formal than the blazer from Monday. She had a tray with 2 coffees in her lap and a leather portfolio balanced on top of that. 7:59, Ethan said. "I don't like to be late," she said. "Neither do I." He held the door open. It was wide enough. He'd replaced the original entry door 2 years ago specifically for accessibility, because 3 of their regular customers had walkers or wheelchairs, and his father's original frame was too narrow. He hadn't mentioned that during the call. He just knew it was something he'd already done. She came inside and looked at the shop with the same focused attention she'd given the bank statements, taking inventory. She didn't comment on anything immediately, which he respected. Premature opinions were usually wrong opinions. "This was your father's?" she asked, looking at the old lift in Bay 1. "From 1994. It still works, but the calibration drifts, and it's too slow for the volume we've been trying to run." He pointed to the empty Bay 3. "I had a second lift until last year. Motor seized. Repair estimate was more than replacement cost, so I had it pulled and I've been running 2 bays since." She was quiet, looking at the space. "Show me the alignment rack," she said. He showed her the alignment rack. He showed her the diagnostic equipment. 3 units, 2 of them current generation, 1 from 2014 that was still serviceable but increasingly unable to read the software architecture on newer vehicles. He showed her the parts room and the break room and the office with its metal desk and cracked chair and his father's calendar still on the wall. He didn't explain the calendar. She looked at it for a moment and then looked away. They sat at the desk with her portfolio open and the coffees between them, and he gave her the full picture. Not the softened version. Not the version where he emphasized the solid customer base without talking about the equipment constraints, but the actual numbers, the actual problems, and the actual sequence they'd developed. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 3 questions, all of them precise and none of them ones he could have predicted. Then she opened the portfolio. "What I'm going to describe isn't charity," she said. "I need you to understand that before I say anything else, Because I think it would matter to you and I'd rather address it directly. It would matter, he agreed. I'm proposing a business arrangement that benefits Sterling Adaptive Technologies specifically and concretely. She turned the portfolio to face him. It held a single-page document, projected numbers, 2 columns, current state versus proposed state, clean and readable. I want to convert your facility to our primary fleet maintenance provider. That means a guaranteed service contract, minimum value of $280,000 annually based on our current vehicle count and average service frequency. Ethan looked at the number. He looked at it the way you look at something that requires a second to properly land. In exchange, she continued, I want exclusivity on fleet service, priority scheduling for our vehicles, and I want you to hire 1 additional certified tech. I have someone in mind if you want a referral. Former employee of the chain provider we're leaving. Good hands. I checked. She paused. The contract alone doesn't solve the equipment problem, so I'm also proposing a capital investment of $65,000 against a 15% revenue share on all commercial contracts, not consumer service, just commercial, for 3 years. After 3 years, the revenue share ends and you own everything outright. He was quiet. Do the math on the back of whatever you want, she said. I'll wait. He didn't do math. He'd already done most of it in his head the way his father had done math. Fast, approximate, good enough to know whether the direction was right before the specifics mattered. Why? He asked. I told you on the phone. The fleet maintenance is the business reason. I got that. He looked at her. But you had this put together before Thursday, before you even knew I'd take the meeting. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression, not discomfort exactly, but the brief visibility of a person recalibrating how much to say. I had Dana pull your reviews Monday afternoon, she said. I read all 112 of them. Then I had her run a background check, standard business due diligence, nothing invasive. Then I looked at Callaway Auto's filing history with the county, your father's original business license, your own Navy records as far as they're public. She paused. I run a company that operates in spaces where people underestimate us because of how we look or how we move or what equipment we use to get through the world. I know what it costs to be systematically overlooked when the quality of what you do is actually excellent. Another pause, shorter. You have a 4.9 rating and you write personal responses to every critical review. Your father had the same reputation for 26 years. That's not luck. Ethan looked at the document again. He thought about his father, about the '87 pickup with the radio he'd spent 2 extra hours on, about Sophie's face when she'd asked about the garage closing, the way she'd tried to ask it carefully, like she'd been practicing how to bring it up. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. Not long. A few days. That's fine. She closed the portfolio. One more thing. Yeah. The tech I mentioned, Marcus Webb. Does that name mean anything to you? Ethan went still. Marcus Webb is the person you want me to hire? He applied to our facilities team 3 months ago. Wrong fit for what we do, but I remembered the name when Dana pulled your file. You have a Marcus listed as a personal reference. She looked at him steadily. Small state. Marcus is my best friend, Ethan said. He's been offering to come work at the garage for 2 years. I kept telling him I couldn't afford a second full-time tech. Victoria picked up her coffee. Sounds like that might change, she said. He looked at her across his father's desk, in the building his father had built, with the cracked chair and the old calendar and the bay out front that was empty because he'd had to pull a lift he couldn't afford to replace. He thought about how strange it was, the specific shape that a turning point had. Not dramatic, not clean, just a woman with a leather portfolio and 2 coffees and numbers that added up. I'll call you Friday, he said. Friday's fine. She began moving toward the door. At the threshold of the office, she stopped and looked back at the calendar, at Raymond Callaway's handwriting. Mrs. Patel, check the damn breaks she keeps ignoring, she read. She ignored them for 2 more years after that, Ethan said. Then she finally let him replace them. He told her she was going to kill somebody. She sent him a pie. Victoria looked at it a moment longer. He sounds like someone worth knowing. He was, Ethan said. She nodded and went out through the wide door into the cold, and the Tesla's lift deployed and carried her up, and the doors closed, and she pulled out of the lot with the careful precision of someone who has learned to trust their own adaptations. Ethan stood in the door of his father's garage and watched her go. He stayed there longer than he needed to, in the cold, thinking about $65,000 and a 15% revenue share and Marcus Webb and Sophie's fox pajamas with the cuffs up past her ankles. Then he went inside and got back to work. He called Marcus that night after Sophie was in bed. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which he always did because Marcus had the same hypervigilance about unanswered communication that Ethan had about exits and sightlines. Relics of the same years, worn differently. "You hear about a company called Sterling Adaptive Technologies?" Ethan asked. A pause. "That's the accessibility tech company, right? My sister uses one of their tablet mounts." "Why?" "Their CEO wants to give me a fleet contract and $65,000 in capital investment." A longer pause. "Say that again." Ethan said it again. "Ethan." Marcus's voice was careful, the way it got when he was trying to slow himself down. "Where did you meet this person?" "Mel's Diner, Monday morning." "At the diner?" "At the diner." "And she just offered to invest in the garage?" "After she had me investigated. Background check, county filings, Navy records. She did her homework." He was quiet a moment. "She also mentioned your name." Another pause. Different quality. "How does she know my name?" "You applied to her facilities team 3 months ago." The line was quiet. Ethan could hear Marcus breathing, processing. "She remembered me," Marcus said slowly. "She remembered you. Said wrong fit for what they do, but she thought you might be a right fit for here. With the contract, I could actually pay you properly." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had something in it that Ethan recognized. The specific tone of a man who has wanted something for a while and is suddenly confronted with the possibility that it might actually happen. "You gonna take the deal?" Marcus asked. Ethan looked at the ceiling of his kitchen. Through the wall, he could hear the small sound of Sophie's white noise machine running, the one she'd insisted on after watching a video about sleep science at school and presenting him with a 17-point argument for why she needed it. He'd bought it that same week. "I think so," he said. "Your father built that place," Marcus said. Not as an argument, just as a fact that needed to be in the room. "I know." "And you think this woman—" "She's not offering to change what it is," Ethan said. "She's offering to give it the equipment it needs to do what it already does. That's different." Another silence. "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's different." They talked another 20 minutes, the way they'd talked since they were 23 and 24, and learning what they were capable of in places that didn't allow for much uncertainty. Marcus asked good questions. Ethan answered them honestly. By the time they hung up, nothing had been decided formally, but they both understood the direction. Ethan sat in the quiet kitchen for a while after that. He thought about the morning at Mel's, the cold, the teenagers, the woman who'd been trying to eat breakfast in peace, and the 4 minutes he'd spent not looking away. He thought about how the thing that had seemed smallest in the moment, the most automatic and unremarkable, just a man deciding he couldn't sit still while someone else absorbed something they didn't deserve, had apparently set something in motion that was larger than he'd understood. He thought about his father, who used to say that the best decisions you ever made were the ones where you couldn't fully explain your reasoning, only that you knew it was right. He didn't know if this was right, but he knew the direction. He went to bed, and for the first time in weeks, the ceiling held nothing he felt compelled to stare at. He called Victoria on Friday at 10 in the morning, between a coolant flush and a tire rotation, standing in the cold just outside the bay door with his phone and his jacket, and the particular quality of silence that comes right before you commit to something you can't take back. She picked up on the second ring. "Ethan, I'll take the deal," he said. "With one condition." A brief pause. "What condition?" "The revenue share drops to 10% after 18 months if the commercial contract volume exceeds 400,000 annually. That's not me being greedy. That's me making sure the arrangement stays equitable as the business grows, because if it grows the way your numbers suggest, 15% starts feeling like a penalty for doing well." Silence on her end. He waited. "That's a fair point," she said. "I'll have the contract language adjusted. Anything else?" "Marcus's salary comes out of operating revenue, not the capital investment. I don't want the investment money touching payroll. The $65,000 goes entirely to equipment." Also reasonable. He could hear her writing something. "You had a couple of days to think about this." "I think fast when the numbers are clear," he said. "It took me 2 days to get comfortable with the part that isn't about numbers." "Which part is that?" He leaned against the bay door frame. Inside, the compressor cycled. "The part where I have a partner," he said. "The garage has always been one person's thing, my father's, then mine. Having someone else with a stake in it is different." "I understand that," she said. And she said it without the practiced empathy that people used when they wanted you to feel heard without actually listening. She said it the way you say something you've thought about from your own experience. "Do you?" he asked. "I took my first outside investment at 24, she said. "I cried in the parking garage of my own building after I signed the paperwork. Not because it was wrong, just because something had changed that couldn't be unchanged." A pause. It was the right decision, and it still cost something to make it. He stood there a moment with that. "I'll have Dana send the revised contract Monday," she said. "You can have your own attorney look at it." "I don't have an attorney. You should get one. Temporarily, just for this. I can give you a name, someone who does small business contracts, honest billing, won't overcomplicate it." "All right." "Ethan." Her voice shifted slightly, the professional briskness dropping one register. "This is going to work." "You can't know that." "No," she agreed. "But I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a bet on a person and a bet on a projection. I've made both. The bets on people are the ones that compound." A brief pause. "I'll talk to you Monday." She hung up. Ethan stood outside the bay door for another 30 seconds, letting the cold work on him, and then he went back inside and finished the tire rotation. The contract was signed on a Tuesday in December, in the conference room of a law office in the county seat that smelled like old paper and central heating. The attorney Victoria had recommended, a compact woman named Sandra Heiss, who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the particular shorthand of someone who had read 10,000 pages of fine print and retained every word, walked Ethan through the document with the patient efficiency of a person who understood that her client was intelligent, but that the language was specialized and the distinction mattered. "Revenue share clause is here," Sandra said, tapping the page. 18-month review is built in, just as you requested. The trigger threshold is $400,000 in commercial contract volume. That's gross revenue on the commercial side only, not consumer. She looked at him over her glasses. The equipment acquisition is structured as an investment, not a loan. That means if the business fails, which I'm not anticipating, but I'm obligated to walk you through it, Sterling Adaptive Technologies takes the equipment back. You don't carry personal debt. I understand. The non-compete clause is narrow. You can't solicit Sterling's board members or senior staff as individual clients for vehicle service for 24 months after contract termination. That's it. Nothing that prevents you from taking any other commercial client in any industry. She turned a page. The exclusivity on fleet service is real. You're their primary provider, and they're committing to routing all standard maintenance through you. Emergency breakdowns on the road are accepted because they're location dependent. Another page. Sterling's minimum annual commitment is $260,000, not $280,000. The original figure was a projection based on current vehicle count. The contract locks in a floor, not a ceiling. I noticed, Ethan said. Sandra looked at him with a brief expression of approval. Good. She stacked the pages. Any questions before you sign? He had 3. He asked them. She answered them directly, without the lawyer's tendency to answer a question with a different question. He signed. Victoria was not in the room. She'd signed her copies 2 days prior and had Dana deliver them. That was a choice, Ethan thought, giving him the space to finalize it without her in the room, without the dynamic of the investor watching the recipient. He'd noticed it and appreciated it and hadn't said anything about it, because some things you appreciated precisely by not making them a conversation. He drove back to the garage in the mid-morning cold and told Carla, who was seated at the desk with the receivables and her thermos. She looked at him for a long moment. "Show me the numbers," she said. He showed her the contract. She read it with the same focused attention she gave the monthly statements, moving through each page steadily, occasionally going back. When she finished, she set it on the desk and sat back. "She didn't bury anything," Carla said. "No. The equipment clause. That's protective of you, not her. She could have structured it as debt and had more leverage." "I know." Carla picked up her thermos and poured and didn't say anything else for a moment. Then, "Your father would have argued about it for 3 weeks and then done exactly what you did." "He would have argued longer than that. He would have been insufferable about it." She said it with the small, precise fondness of someone who knew a person well enough to describe their flaws accurately. He trusted people who showed him the math. You're the same way. Ethan called Marcus that afternoon. "We're signing your contract next week," he said. "I need you to give notice at the current place." Marcus was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Ethan, Marcus, come work at the garage. That's what I'm saying." Another pause, shorter. "Okay," Marcus said. His voice had the same quality it had in the kitchen the week before. Something restrained, something he wasn't going to let run loose because they were both men who'd learned to keep things contained. "Okay, I'll give 2 weeks." 2 weeks is fine. We've got equipment coming in 4 weeks anyway. I want you there for the installation." The equipment order went through the following Monday. The new lift, a Benpack 4-post, commercial grade, with a weight capacity nearly double the old unit, was scheduled for delivery in early January. A second mid-rise lift for the newly restored Bay 3, a Hunter alignment system with current generation software, the kind that talked directly to the diagnostic equipment and cut alignment time by 40%. A new set of professional diagnostic units, 2 of them, both capable of reading architecture on vehicles through the current model year. $63,400. He'd kept $2,000 in reserve for installation contingencies because there were always installation contingencies. He stood in the empty Bay 3 on the afternoon the order was confirmed and looked at the space where the seized lift had been pulled out, the concrete floor still bearing the faint outline of where the columns had stood. He thought about his father putting in the original equipment in the 90s, the way Raymond had described it, saving for 2 years, buying secondhand, spending a weekend installing it with a friend who knew hydraulics, building the thing incrementally because that was the only way available. He thought about what it meant to do it differently, to do it all at once, properly, with equipment that was going to last 20 years instead of being nursed along past its natural life. He thought about whether that felt like a betrayal of how his father had done things, or whether it was simply the next version of the same project. He decided it was the second thing. He couldn't afford the first. The equipment arrived on a Thursday in January, 6 days before Ethan had expected it, which meant a scramble to get the installation crew coordinated and the bay cleared and the power upgraded to handle the new lift's requirements. Marcus was there for all of it, had actually shown up a week early after his former employer had released him immediately rather than holding him for the full notice period, which was a decision they'd apparently made for reasons of their own and which Marcus described simply as typical without elaborating. Marcus Webb was 41, built along the same general lines as Ethan but broader in the shoulders, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and the specific unhurried competence of a man who had been doing difficult physical work since before it was legal for him to work. He and Ethan had served overlapping deployments years ago. Not the same unit, but the kind of proximity that creates a different kind of familiarity, the sort where you know what a person is capable of under pressure, because you've seen it rather than heard about it. They'd stayed in contact afterward, the way some men do and some don't. And the friendship that had developed in civilian life was quieter and more ordinary than anything military service involved. Fantasy football, bad movies, Marcus's long-running project of teaching Sophie to play chess, which she was resisting with considerable creativity. He walked the new lift installation with Ethan while the crew worked, asking questions about load ratings and service clearances that told Ethan he'd already looked up the specs. "You read the manual before you even saw it," Ethan said. "Old habit." Marcus crouched to look at one of the column base plates. "Installation looks clean. These guys know what they're doing. Victoria's facilities manager recommended them. They do all her accessibility retrofits in the region. Marcus stood. He glanced at Ethan sideways. You've been saying her name a lot. She's a business partner. I know what she is. Marcus turned back to the lift. I'm just noting a factual pattern in your speech. Noted, Ethan said, and moved on to look at the alignment rack installation. And Marcus let it go because that was the nature of the friendship. You could say the thing once and the other person heard it, and then you moved on. Victoria came to see the completed installation on a Saturday morning in late January, 2 weeks after the equipment was in and calibrated and running. She came alone, without Dana, which Ethan noticed. She'd been to the garage twice since Thursday's initial meeting, once with her facilities manager to go over the fleet service protocol, once to drop off the signed insurance certificates. But this was different. This was her coming on a Saturday when the shop was officially closed. The way you visit something you have a personal stake in rather than a professional one. He showed her the new Bay 3 first. The BendPak lift in its full extension, the clean concrete floor, the tool organization along the wall. She looked at it with the same inventory-taking attention she'd given everything else. The column spacing is wider than I expected, she said. Commercial grade? It'll handle a transit van or a light truck. Most lifts this class max out at conventional sedans. He nodded toward the fleet service schedule Carla had pinned to the wall by the parts counter. Your company runs 3 transit vans. I wanted to be sure we could handle them in-house rather than sending them out. She looked at the schedule. Her eyes moved down it the way they moved through numbers, not reading every word, reading the structure. You've already slotted 4 of our vehicles for the first month, she said. Carla set that up last week. We rotated them to spread the service intervals. You won't have more than 2 vehicles out of rotation at the same time. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking at the schedule. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. It's what makes sense for your operations. He paused. If the scheduling doesn't work for you, Carla can adjust. It works perfectly, she said. She turned from the schedule and looked at him. That's the kind of thing you only do if you actually thought about how it affects the other side of the arrangement. I've been running a service business for 1.5 years, he said. My father ran one for 26. You think about how things affect the customer, or you lose the customer. She looked at him for a moment in the particular way she had, direct, assessing, without the social lubricant that most people applied to direct eye contact to keep it from feeling like an evaluation. He'd stopped finding it uncomfortable. It was just how she operated. Come look at the alignment system, he said. He walked her through the Hunter equipment, the calibration targets, the software interface, the report it generated that customers could take home showing before and after measurements. She asked technical questions that surprised him at first and then didn't, because she ran a company that built adaptive mechanical systems, and the understanding of tolerances and calibration wasn't foreign to her. Marcus came in at 11 because he'd left a jacket, and came back for it and then ended up staying to help Ethan prep the following week's service schedule. He was introduced to Victoria without ceremony, the way introductions happen when everyone already knows roughly who everyone else is. Ms. Sterling, Marcus said. Mr. Webb. She shook his hand. You applied to our facilities team last fall. I did. He wasn't visibly uncomfortable with it. Wrong fit. You were overqualified for the position you applied for, she said. The role you should have applied for wasn't posted yet. My facilities director has been building a senior maintenance coordinator position for the past quarter. Marcus looked at her. You're telling me that now? You found a better option, she said, with something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm just correcting the record. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the alignment rack. I'm going to go get my jacket, Marcus said, and went to the break room. Victoria watched him go and then turned back to the alignment equipment with the serene composure of someone who had made her point and didn't need to watch it land. Ethan said, Did you actually check on that position, or did you just say that? I actually checked, she said. Last week, when I was reviewing the fleet service contract staffing, I saw his name on Ethan's employment roster and looked him up. A pause. I wanted to make sure the person you'd brought in had the skills the contract required. And? He's excellent. His certification history is better than anything we have in-house. She glanced toward the break room. I thought he should know the other thing too, that it wasn't about his qualifications. Ethan considered this. You didn't have to tell him that. No, she agreed, but it was true, and it cost me nothing to say it, and it mattered to him. She looked at Ethan. Some things are worth saying just because they're accurate. He thought about that for the rest of the day after she left. Go on. February came in cold and relentless, the kind of cold that found every gap in the garage's insulation and exploited it, and Ethan spent $200 on weather stripping and another $300 on a supplemental heating unit for Bay 3 because the new lift deserved better operating temperatures than the old equipment had endured. Small investments, the kind that compounded. The fleet service was running. Sterling Adaptive Technologies vehicles came through on the schedule Carla had built, and Marcus handled most of them with the methodical efficiency of someone who treated other people's vehicles with the same seriousness he brought to his own. The transit van fleet in particular required consistent attention. Adaptive equipment added mechanical complexity, more systems to check, more failure points to monitor, and Marcus had pulled the service histories on every vehicle in the Sterling fleet before the first one came through the door, so he knew exactly what each one needed before it arrived. Word moved through the county the way word moves in places where the population is small enough that reputation travels on its own, not through advertising, not through social media campaigns, but through the particular credibility of one person telling another that they'd had good work done and hadn't been taken for more than the job required. The new equipment made a difference that customers noticed and mentioned. The alignment rack produced reports that were readable and specific, and people who'd been told elsewhere that their alignment was a little off suddenly had measurements that showed them exactly how off and exactly what had been corrected. It sounds small. It wasn't small to the people who saw it. By March, they were booking 2 weeks out. Ethan hired a part-time service writer, a young woman named Becca, who'd been managing the front desk at a dealership and had the particular talent for translating between mechanic language and customer language that was rarer than most people understood. She came in 4 days a week and took the phones and scheduled service and explained estimates in terms that didn't require a technical background to follow. And within 3 weeks, the number of estimate approvals on first contact went up by a margin that made Carla raise her eyebrows in a way that was as close to celebratory as she got. Ethan told Victoria about it on one of the calls they'd settled into by then. Not formal meetings, not business reviews, just 30-minute calls every other Wednesday evening where they talked through how things were running and whether anything needed adjustment. The calls had developed their own rhythm. They'd cover the operational material in the first 15 minutes, and then the remaining time would unspool into whatever came up, which was sometimes strategic and sometimes not. A service writer was the right call, Victoria said. The customer-facing communication is where most small shops lose the relationship. Becca explained a transmission rebuild to a 63-year-old retired teacher last week, using an analogy about reorganizing a filing cabinet, Ethan said. The woman approved a $2,800 estimate on the spot. That's a skill you can't train from a textbook. No. He was in the office, the garage closed, Sophie doing homework on the couch in the room she could see from his desk if he left the door open, a configuration they'd settled into on the evenings he worked late. How was your board meeting? Better than last month's. A pause. We closed the contract with the school district adaptive transportation program. 47 vehicles over 3 years. That's significant. It's very significant. He could hear a particular controlled quality in her voice, the sound of someone who is pleased but is accustomed to not performing pleasure too openly in professional contexts. It took 9 months of negotiations and 2 separate attempts by a competitor to undercut us with lower spec equipment. We won on certification and track record. Not on price. Never on price, she said. If you compete on price, you attract clients who'll leave you the moment someone undercuts you again. We've always positioned on quality and reliability. The school district understood what it was buying. He thought about his father's approach to estimates. Never the cheapest, never inflated, always exact, and always explained. The customers who left for cheaper alternatives occasionally came back, usually after a bad experience elsewhere. The ones who stayed had stayed for 20 years. Same principle, he said. Same principle, she agreed. Sophie appeared in the doorway of the office, holding up her vocabulary worksheet with a look that communicated she had a question and had been patient about it for an appropriate amount of time. "Hold on a second," Ethan said into the phone. He looked at Sophie. "Which one?" She pointed. "Exacerbate," he said, "to make something worse. Use it in the sentence they gave you." Sophie looked at the page. "The cold weather exacerbated Gerald's—" She stopped. "Can I use Gerald? The tree?" "It's a vocabulary sentence, not a test." "Sure," he said. She wrote something and disappeared back to the couch. Victoria had heard all of it. "Gerald is the tree," she said. "She named it when she was 4. It stuck." He leaned back in the cracked chair. "She's been asking about you, actually." A brief pause. "About me specifically?" "She knows there's a business partner. She knows the garage is doing better. She asked who the partner was, and I told her your name, and she looked you up on the school library computer and informed me at dinner that you have a Wikipedia page." "I have a Wikipedia page," Victoria confirmed in a tone that suggested she had complicated feelings about this. She said, "It makes you sound important." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were smart and you did good work and she'd probably like you." He paused. "She asked if you were pretty." The line was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" Victoria asked, and her voice had shifted in a way that was slight enough that he might have imagined it, except that he had, by this point, listened to enough of her inflections to know when something had changed. "I said that was an odd question, and she should finish her green beans," Ethan said. "That's a non-answer." "She's 8 years old," he said. "Some questions don't need direct answers yet." Another silence, different quality from the first. "Ethan," Victoria said. "Yeah." "This is a business arrangement." "I know what it is," he said. He said it the same way he said everything. Flat, factual, the way you describe a road condition or a weather front. No heat in it, just the sentence. I'm not saying that to put distance between us," she said, and he could hear her choosing words more carefully than she usually did. "I'm saying it because I think we're both people who do better when things are clearly labeled. And you're labeling it. I'm noting it." "There's a difference?" "Yes." A pause. "I'm not noting it to close a door. I'm noting it to be honest about where we are." He looked at the calendar on the wall. March squares now, his own handwriting in them because January had turned the page and he'd finally started filling in his own entries. Service reminders, supplier calls, Sophie's school events in a different color ink because he'd read somewhere that visual separation helped with scheduling, and he was trying things. His father's handwriting was still there on the backside of the pages he hadn't turned yet. "I appreciate the honesty," he said, and he meant it exactly as directly as it sounded. "It's the only way I know how to operate," she said. "I noticed that the first morning," he said. She laughed, a brief, real sound, not performed, not shaped for an audience. He'd heard it before in the calls, but not often, and each time it caught him slightly off guard because it was so different from her professional register, more unguarded, more like the woman who'd been sitting alone at breakfast wanting 5 quiet minutes and getting something else entirely. They talked another 12 minutes about the second quarter fleet schedule and a potential referral she was sending from her facilities network. And then they said goodbye and hung up, and Ethan sat in the office for a moment before going out to check on Sophie's vocabulary sentences. She was asleep on the couch, worksheet still in her lap, pencil on the cushion beside her. He took the pencil and read the sentences. All of them correct, including the one about Gerald. He carried her to bed. She was getting heavy, almost too heavy for this, but not quite yet, and came back to the office and stood in the doorway looking at the garage through the interior window. The new lifts visible through the shop glass, the alignment rack in its bay, the tool organization along the walls that Marcus had rearranged in his second week into a system that was more intuitive than the one Ethan had inherited. It looked different, not unrecognizable. Still his father's floor plan, still the same address on the same corner, but different, the way something looks when it's been given room to become more fully what it was trying to be. He turned off the office light and stood in the dark for a moment before he left. The referral Victoria sent arrived the following week in the form of a county contract inquiry. The Regional Transit Authority had heard about the Sterling arrangement through the county administrator's office and wanted to discuss a maintenance contract for their paratransit fleet, which consisted of 32 vehicles, all of them adapted, all of them currently being serviced by a provider 2 counties over whose contract was expiring in June. Ethan sat across from the Transit Authority's operations director in his office on a Tuesday afternoon and went through the same thing he'd gone through with Victoria 6 months earlier. No soft pedaling, no inflating, just the actual capabilities of the shop and the actual rates and the actual turnaround times he could commit to and why. The operations director was a heavy-set man named Gerald Pruitt, who had the particular wariness of someone who had been oversold on services before and was carrying the residue of it. "Your shop is small," Pruitt said. "For your fleet size, yes," Ethan agreed. "What I can offer is a dedicated scheduling block for your vehicles, 4 reserve service slots per week, priority over standard consumer bookings, guaranteed 48-hour turnaround on anything that isn't a major drivetrain issue, and 72 hours on those. The current provider gets our vehicles done same day sometimes." "Sometimes," Ethan said. "What's their average?" Pruitt looked at him. "Pull your last 6 months of service records," Ethan said. "Calculate average time from vehicle drop-off to vehicle pickup. I'll wait." Pruitt didn't pull the records in the room, but the question did something to his expression. A small recalibration, the look of someone who realizes they've been using an anecdote as a data point. "I'll need references," Pruitt said. "Victoria Sterling," Ethan said. "Sterling Adaptive Technologies. She's been our primary commercial client since January. You can call her directly. I'll have her assistant send you her direct number." He texted Dana before Pruitt was out of the parking lot. Victoria called him that evening. "Gerald Pruitt reached out an hour ago," she said. "That was fast. He wanted to know if I'd recommend you without any caveats." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the only caveat was that if he sent you 32 vehicles, he'd need to negotiate a longer scheduling window than you'd offered because you're not staffed for that volume yet." A pause. "And that you'd tell him the same thing yourself if he asked." Ethan was quiet a moment. "You protected the deal and protected my credibility at the same time." "I told him the truth," she said. "It did both of those things simultaneously because the truth was favorable." A pause. "Are you staffed for 32 vehicles?" "Not yet. Marcus can handle the adaptive equipment, but I'd need another tech for the volume." "What's your timeline to hire?" 3 weeks if I move now, maybe less. I have 2 strong candidates who've applied in the last month." "Tell Pruitt 6 weeks as a buffer," she said. "Come in under that, and you start the relationship with a win." He thought about this. "That's smart. I've been doing business long enough to know that managing expectations correctly in the first month of a contract determines the entire relationship." She paused. "Also, it's just honest. You shouldn't promise timelines you're not certain of." "I wasn't going to," he said. "I know," she said. "I was agreeing with you, not correcting you." He hired a tech named Devin Parks 2 weeks later, 29 years old, ASE, certified, quiet and methodical in the way that Ethan had come to recognize as the mark of someone who took the work seriously. Devin had been at a dealership, like Becca, and had the same quality of someone who was ready for an environment where the work wasn't split into narrow specializations, but required broader capability. The paratransit contract was signed the first week of April. Carla put the signed copy on his desk with her thermos beside it and a yellow sticky note on top that said, "Your father would be insufferable about this." Underlined once. He left the note there. The second quarter numbers, when they came in, were not what he'd projected. They were better. Not by a margin that suggested anything was easy. They still had months where the consumer side was softer than the commercial load required, and the equipment loan was being drawn down on schedule, but the schedule was still a schedule with months on it. But the trajectory was clear in the way trajectories sometimes become clear, not all at once but incrementally, the way you realize you've been climbing a hill only when you turn around and see how far the bottom is. Marcus noticed it first, the way Marcus noticed operational things before Ethan did, because Marcus was watching the shop floor, while Ethan was also watching the books, and Sophie's school schedule, and the weather forecast that affected whether the lot needed to be salted. "We're turning work away," Marcus said one afternoon in late April. leaning in the doorway of the office while Ethan was on the phone. He waited for the call to end. "We booked out 3 weeks on the consumer side. There's a window Tuesday morning that opened up when the Kerrigan fleet job moved, and I filled it with 3 oil services before I even put it on the board." "Good. I'm saying we might need to think about another bay." Ethan looked at him. "The lot behind the building," Marcus said. "Your father owned it. It's in the estate filing. I looked." "I know he owned it. It's on the county tax roll." "So it's yours?" Ethan sat back. He looked at the window that faced the side of the building, beyond which the rear lot was a rectangle of frost-cracked asphalt and 2 dead trees and the vague footprint of an old storage structure Raymond had torn down in 2007. "That's a different conversation," Ethan said. "I know," Marcus said. "I'm just starting it early so you have time to think about it." He pushed off the doorframe. "You've been making every other decision 6 steps ahead. Just noting you might want to start on this one." Ethan said nothing, because Marcus was right, and there was no point in saying so. After Marcus left, he sat there with the second quarter numbers and the paratransit contract and Devon's first performance review. Good, thorough, the kind of notes that made future decisions easier. And he thought about the rear lot and what it would mean to expand into it, and what kind of operation that would make Callaway Auto, in scope and in character, and whether those 2 things could coexist. He thought about Victoria saying, "The bets on people are the ones that compound." He thought about his father filling in March squares by hand because he trusted his own record-keeping. He thought about Sophie, who had asked if his partner was pretty and gotten a non-answer, and who had, in the weeks since, begun asking small and specific questions about adaptive technology with the particular curiosity she turned toward things she was genuinely interested in. Not performative interest, the real kind, the kind that produced follow-up questions you hadn't anticipated. He didn't call Victoria that evening. He sat with the question a while first, the way some decisions needed to be sat with before they were ready to be discussed. Not because the answer wasn't forming, but because the answer was forming, and he wanted to understand its shape before he said it out loud and made it real. Outside the maple tree, Gerald was just starting to show the first faint green of new growth along the lower branches, the small, defiant insistence of things that come back. The first sign was small enough to dismiss. Someone had keyed the driver's side of a Sterling fleet van overnight, a long, deliberate scratch from the front wheel well to the rear door, the kind that required standing still in a parking lot and dragging metal across paint with intent. It happened on a Tuesday in early May, in the lot beside the garage where Ethan had started parking the commercial vehicles awaiting service. He found it at 6:40 in the morning when he came in ahead of Marcus and Devon, before Carla, before Becca, in the particular silence of a shop that hadn't started its day yet. He stood there looking at it for a long moment. Then he took pictures, documented the vehicle's intake condition for the insurance file, and called the non-emergency line to report it. The officer who came out was polite and thorough and honest enough to say that without security camera footage, the chances of identifying who had done it were low. Ethan thanked him for his time, and after the officer left, he spent 30 minutes reviewing the sightlines from the existing building and calculating what a proper camera system would cost and where the coverage gaps were. He ordered the cameras that afternoon. 4 units, exterior coverage on all sides of the building, cloud storage, motion-triggered alerts to his phone. $1,400 he hadn't planned to spend. He told Victoria about the scratch on their Wednesday call. "You filed the report," she said. "Yes. And the cameras are going in this week?" "Thursday." "Good." A pause. "Ethan, do you think it was random?" He'd thought about it since Tuesday morning. He thought about it the way he'd been trained to think about isolated incidents, not as isolated incidents, but as data points in a pattern that might not yet be visible. "Probably random," he said, "but I don't like probably." She was quiet for a moment. "Neither do I." The second sign was less easy to dismiss. It came 2 weeks later in the form of a letter from the county zoning board, formal, administrative in tone, informing Ethan that a complaint had been filed regarding the commercial vehicle volume at the Route 9 location, specifically citing concerns about traffic pattern disruption and lot capacity relative to the original business license footprint. The letter was not a citation. It was a notice of complaint, which meant someone had formally initiated a review process, which meant Ethan would need to respond in writing within 30 days and potentially appear before the board to address the concerns. He read it twice at his desk on a Thursday morning, with his coffee cooling beside him. "Do you know who files zoning complaints with the county?" he asked Carla, who was at the receivables and had been watching him read it. "Anyone can file one," she said. "The filer isn't disclosed in the notice. The complaint itself is public record once it's entered, but the filer's identity is only visible on the original submission." She paused. "Which you'd need to go downtown to request." "I know." He set the letter down. "How does someone know that our commercial volume has increased? There's no public reporting requirement on service contracts." Carla looked at him. "The paratransit vehicles have county livery plates. Anyone who's driven past this lot in the last 6 weeks has seen county vehicles here on a regular basis." "Who would have reason to care?" She set her thermos down. "Ethan, who does automotive service contracts in this county at the commercial level?" He knew the answer. He'd known it before he asked. Brennan Automotive Group. 3 locations in the county, the largest on Route 12, 4 miles west, the one that had opened 2 years ago with a marketing campaign that specifically targeted service contracts for fleet and municipal clients. They were corporate-owned, franchised, and had the backing of a regional holding company that had been systematically acquiring automotive service businesses across 4 counties for the past 5 years. Raymond Callaway had never directly competed with them because in Raymond's time, the volume hadn't warranted it. In the past 4 months, Callaway Auto had taken 2 contracts that Brennan had likely expected to receive by default. "I don't have proof," Ethan said. "No," Carla agreed. "You don't." He went downtown that afternoon and requested the original complaint filing. The clerk was apologetic about the processing time, 3 to 5 business days before the physical document would be available for inspection. Ethan thanked her and drove back to the garage and did not say anything to Marcus or Devin or Becca about what was happening, because there was nothing concrete to say yet, and speculation in a small team traveled fast and arrived at people's ears in shapes it hadn't left in. He called Victoria from the parking lot instead. He told her about the letter, about Brennan Automotive, about the keyed van and the probable connection he couldn't yet prove. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The zoning complaint is a delay tactic," she said. "Whoever filed it knows that even a baseless complaint requires you to spend time and money responding. That's the point. It's not meant to win, it's meant to cost." "I know." "The scratch on the van is different. That's personal. Or it's meant to look personal," he said. "Make it feel like harassment. Get in my head." "Is it in your head?" He thought about that honestly. "A little." "That's okay," she said. "A little is fine. It means you're taking it seriously without letting it run you." Another pause. "What do you want to do?" "I want to respond to the zoning board in writing, thoroughly, with documented evidence of our compliance with every aspect of the business license. I want the response to be so complete that anyone reviewing it can see the complaint has no factual basis." "Good. What else?" "I want to find out who filed it." "And then?" He was quiet. "Ethan," she said. "And then what?" "And then I want to know what I'm actually dealing with," he said. "After that, I decide." "That's the right sequence," she said. "Don't decide before you have the complete picture." He went back inside and pulled up the county business license database and started building the documentation file. He worked on it until 7 that night, when Devin locked up and Marcus stopped in the doorway of the office and looked at the stack of papers. "The zoning thing?" Marcus said. Ethan looked up. "How do you know about that?" "Carla mentioned it. She didn't mean to. She was on the phone with the county records office when I walked by." Marcus leaned against the frame. "Brennan?" "Probably." "You want me to—" "No," Ethan said before Marcus could finish the sentence. Marcus was quiet. "I know what you are going to offer," Ethan said. "The answer is no. We handle this correctly." "I wasn't going to suggest anything specific," Marcus said. "You were going to suggest something in the direction of talking to someone we both know who still has connections to people who resolve things informally." Ethan set down his pen. That's not how we do this. Marcus looked at the floor. When he looked back up, his expression was the kind that came from knowing someone was right about something you already understood was right, but hadn't fully metabolized yet. Old instincts, he said. I know. Ethan understood it completely. There were years in both of them where the correct response to a threat was the most direct response available, where delay and documentation were luxuries that the environment didn't provide. Those years had left a particular imprint that civilian life hadn't entirely erased. We're not those guys anymore. Or we are, but that's not how we use it. Marcus nodded once, slowly. All right. Go home, Ethan said. I'll finish this tonight. The complaint filer's name, when Ethan got the document 5 days later, was listed as Hargrove Commercial Property Partners, LLC. It took him 40 minutes of cross-referencing county and corporation records to trace it to a holding company that appeared twice in Brennan Automotive Group's publicly available vendor filings. He printed the chain of documents. He put them in a folder. He drove to Victoria's office. He hadn't been there before. They'd always met at the garage or spoken by phone. Sterling Adaptive Technologies occupied the top floor and a half of a 4-story building in the county's small commercial district, the kind of building that had been renovated recently enough to have accessible entrances built into the original design rather than retrofitted into the margins. The lobby had wide corridors and an elevator bank with buttons at 2 heights and a reception desk staffed by a young man who confirmed Ethan's name against a visitor list before he'd finished saying it. Dana Rice, Victoria's assistant, met him at the elevator. She was in her late 30s, efficient and composed, and treated him with the particular professionalism of someone who had assessed him early and placed him in the category of people worth being straightforward with. She's finishing a call, Dana said. Should be 2 minutes. Can I get you anything? I'm fine, Ethan said. Thank you. The 2 minutes were 3, which he spent looking at the company's product line displayed in a glass case in the waiting area. Adaptive driving controls, tablet mounting systems, modified steering columns, a prototype risk control unit that hadn't been released yet. The work was clean and purposeful in the way of things designed by people who understood the need from the inside out. Victoria met him at the door to the conference room. She was in a dark blue blazer he hadn't seen before, and she looked at him with the same sharp-eyed directness she always carried, but with an additional quality, attention, the real kind, the kind that noticed something was different about the reason for this visit. You came in person, she said. I needed to show you something physically, he said. He sat down at the table and opened the folder and laid out the document chain in sequence. The zoning complaint, the LLC filing, the Brennan vendor records, the connection between them. Victoria went through it in order. She took her time. She went back twice, once to the LLC filing, once to the vendor record, and when she finished, she set the last page down and looked at the arrangement of documents the way she looked at alignment rack readouts, reading the totality of it. This is enough to take to an attorney, she said. For what relief? He asked. Filing a complaint with the county isn't illegal. Doing it through a corporate entity that's one step removed from Brennan isn't illegal. It's designed to be annoying and costly, not legally actionable. So what do you want to do with it? I want to respond to the zoning board in a way that makes clear we know where the complaint came from, he said. Not accusatory, factual. We document our compliance thoroughly. We note the corporate connection between the filer and our primary local competitor, and we let the board see the full picture. Victoria looked at him. That's a significant move. If Brennan has relationships with board members, then we find that out too, Ethan said. And we document that. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her thinking, not hesitating, thinking, which were different things with her. You're not reacting, she said. I'm acting, he said. There's a difference. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, but the small visible indication of a thought confirmed. There's a county small business association meeting next Wednesday, she said. The transit authority director is usually there, 2 county commissioners, the Chamber of Commerce chair. I've been on their advisory panel for 2 years. She folded her hands on the table. I can speak to our arrangement with Callaway Auto in that context, publicly, on the record, in front of people who sit on the zoning board's oversight committee. Ethan looked at her. You'd be drawing attention to yourself. I've been drawing attention to myself since I was 24 years old and told a room full of investors that they were underestimating what adaptive technology could become. She met his eyes evenly. I'm not afraid of a room. This could get messy before it gets clean, he said. Most things that mattered do. He thought about Marcus in the doorway, about old instincts, about the temptation to handle things the short way, directly, finally, with the kind of decisiveness that his years had made easy for him. He thought about the fact that he'd said no to that and meant it, and that sitting in this conference room with a folder of documents and a business partner who was offering to walk into a public meeting and say difficult things on the record was what the longer, harder way looked like. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They spent another hour going through the response document together, Ethan's draft and her revisions, which were mainly about specificity, replacing general statements with precise measurements and dates, the kind of documentation that doesn't leave room for interpretation. She had a particular quality when she worked this way, unhurried but efficient, focused in the way of someone who understood that the quality of the paperwork was the quality of the argument. At one point, she caught an error in his vehicle count. He'd listed the Sterling fleet at 41 vehicles, but the paratransit contract had added 4 units in March that he hadn't updated in the document. 45, she said. Right. He made the correction. I should have caught that. You were looking at the legal framing. I was looking at the numbers. She turned to the next page. That's why 2 people go through it. He looked at her for a moment. She was annotating the margin of the document, small, precise handwriting, and she didn't look up. He watched her work for a second longer than was strictly necessary, and then looked back at his own copy. Bullcam. The vandalism escalated on a Friday night in late May. Not the van this time, the shop. Ethan's phone woke him at 2:17 in the morning, the camera system's motion alert. He was on the images before he was fully awake, the old reflex of reading a situation at speed that still worked even through sleep fog. The footage showed 2 figures in dark clothing moving through the rear lot, and by the time he'd processed what he was seeing, the notification arrived from the shop's alarm company that a sensor had been tripped. He called it in before he was out of bed. Then he called Marcus. Don't go in yet, Marcus said immediately. I know. He was already dressed, moving toward the truck. I'm going to sit on the street until the officers arrive. I'm coming. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, Marcus said, and hung up. Ethan parked on the street side of the building and watched the lot from inside the truck with the engine off until the first patrol car arrived 8 minutes later. He walked the responding officers through the camera footage on his phone, and they cleared the building and confirmed what the footage had suggested. The rear door had been forced, the lock damaged but not entirely defeated by whatever tool they'd used. Inside, the break room had been gone through. 2 laptops missing. The new diagnostic unit in Bay 2 had been shoved off its cart and the screen was cracked. The officer cataloging the scene estimated the replacement value at $6,000 to $8,000. Marcus arrived while the report was still being taken. He walked through the building without touching anything, looking at the damage with a contained expression that Ethan recognized. The controlled assessment of someone who wanted to do something immediate and was not doing it. After the officers were done, and the incident numbers had been exchanged, and the board-up crew had been called for the rear door, Marcus and Ethan stood in the parking lot in the cooling May night. 2 incidents in 3 weeks, Marcus said. 3, Ethan said. The camera order was the response to the first one. You think it's the same people? I think it's organized, Ethan said. The van scratch was simple. This was a test of whether we had cameras. They used the rear approach because it was the least covered angle in the original setup. And now you've got the extended coverage. Got it last week. He looked at the building. They didn't know that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. So we have them on camera. Partial footage. Faces aren't visible. They planned that right. But gate, build, vehicle approach if they parked nearby. He'd already sent the full footage to the incident report file. There's enough for pattern recognition if there's a follow-on incident. There won't be a follow-on incident, Marcus said, and his voice had the particular flat quality of someone who had made a decision. Marcus. I'm not going to do anything, Marcus said. I'm just saying, when word gets around that you have the footage, they'll stop. Because the next step would be escalation. And escalation means the footage becomes evidence in something more serious than vandalism. He was right. Ethan knew he was right. He also knew that being right wasn't the same as being easy, and the two of them standing in a parking lot at 3 in the morning with $6,000 of damage inside was not easy regardless of who was right about what. He called Victoria at 7 after he'd slept 2 hours and come back to assess the damage in daylight. She answered immediately. I saw the alert. Dana flagged it in the overnight summary. Are you all right? I'm fine. The shop took some damage. Rear door, a cracked diagnostic screen, 2 laptops. He was in the office, looking at the bay through the interior window where Devin had already started setting up the bay to equipment that hadn't been damaged. 6 to 8,000. Insurance should cover most of it. Have you called the insurance company? First thing this morning. What about the police report? Filed last night. I have the incident number. A pause. Ethan, this is getting serious. I know. What do you need? He thought about the question. It was the kind of question she asked that other people didn't. Not, are you okay, or what happened, but the operational question, the one that was actually useful. I need the county small business meeting to happen sooner than Wednesday if it can, he said, and I need the zoning board response filed by end of week. I'll make some calls this morning, she said. The meeting timing isn't in my control, but I can accelerate the zoning response. Sandra Heiss can file it as a priority. A pause. And I'm going to reach out to Gerald Pruitt at the Transit Authority. He needs to know about the incidents. The paratransit contract creates a public interest dimension here. You think Pruitt will care? I think Pruitt is a county official who has a service contract with a business that's being targeted by what looks like a coordinated interference campaign, she said. Yes, I think he'll care. He hadn't thought of it that way. He'd been thinking about the garage, the damage, the cost, the staff who would arrive this morning and see what had happened. He hadn't been thinking about what it looked like from the county's perspective. You're doing it again, he said. Doing what? Seeing the whole board when I'm looking at the pieces. She was quiet for a moment. You would have gotten there, she said. I've just been doing this longer. Stop being diplomatic about it, he said. It's useful when you see what I'm missing. Don't smooth it over. Another silence, different from the first. Okay, she said. You were focused on the operational damage. I was looking at the political and relational dimensions you hadn't gotten to yet. Both matter. You need both. That's better, he said. He could hear her breath for a moment, quiet, and when she spoke again there was something in her voice that was a register below professional. I'm sorry this is happening, she said. It's not your fault. The arrangement brought the attention, she said. I knew that was a possibility when we set it up. I factored it into the risk assessment and I decided the upside justified it. A pause. I'm not apologizing for the decision. I'm sorry you're dealing with the fallout. He looked at his father's calendar on the wall. June now, his own handwriting filling the squares. I'd make the same decision again, he said. So would you. Yes, she said, we would. The morning unfolded the way mornings after bad nights unfold, steadily, with the particular focus that comes from having no choice but to move forward through it. Devin arrived at 8 and assessed the damage diagnostic unit with the calm pragmatism of a man who had grown up in a household where things broke and you fixed them, or you went without. Marcus came in at 8:30 with coffees for everyone and said nothing specific but was present in the way that mattered. Becca handled the morning's phone calls with a composure that Ethan hadn't asked her to perform and appreciated precisely because it was genuine. Carla arrived last, read the situation in 30 seconds, sat down at the desk, and started on the insurance documentation before anyone had briefed her. Mrs. Patel called, she said while she typed. She heard something happened. She wants to know if she needs to reschedule her Tuesday appointment. Tell her Tuesday is fine, Ethan said. I already did. Carla didn't look up from the keyboard. I told her we had a minor security incident and that operations were fully normal. She paused. She said, and I'm quoting, tell Ethan his father would be proud. Then she said she'd bring something. He looked out the window. She's going to bring another pie. Marcus said from the doorway of the break room. Probably, Ethan agreed. By noon, the rear door had been temporarily secured with a commercial-grade deadbolt and the board-up crew's plywood pending the replacement frame, which was ordered and would arrive in 3 days. Devon had sourced a replacement diagnostic screen through the supplier network. It would take a week, but the unit itself was functional, with the cracked screen in the interim. The laptops were a loss, but Carla had been backing data to the cloud weekly, so the actual information loss was minimal. Operational disruption, 2 days at reduced capacity. Recovery, full. Ethan wrote that in the incident file, not because the insurance company required it, they didn't, but because he wanted it on record that this had been absorbed. The County Small Business Association meeting was on Wednesday, as originally scheduled, and Victoria arrived before Ethan did. He came in from the parking lot to find her already at a table near the front of the rented conference room, speaking with Gerald Pruitt and a woman Ethan didn't recognize, but who turned out to be the county commissioner for the 2nd District. Victoria was composed and direct in the way she always was in public contexts, not performing ease, but actually at ease, the way someone is when they've been in enough rooms that the room itself holds no particular intimidation. She introduced him to both of them when he reached the table. Ethan Callaway, she said. Callaway Auto on Route 9. They're our primary fleet maintenance provider and the Transit Authority's paratransit contractor. The commissioner, her name was Walsh, Linda Walsh, shook his hand with the particular attention of someone who has been briefed. Ms. Sterling mentioned the recent incidents at your facility, she said. I was sorry to hear it. The police report is filed, Ethan said. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. Do you have a sense of who's behind it? He was careful here, the way Victoria had coached him to be careful, specific about documented facts, silent about inference, even when the inference was well-founded. I have documented a connection between the zoning complaint filer and a competitor in the commercial automotive sector. I've shared that documentation with the zoning board as part of my formal response. Walsh looked at him with the calibrated attention of a politician who understood exactly what he'd said without saying it. I see. Pruitt was less circumspect. I pulled our paratransit vehicles from the Brennan contract last year because 3 of them came back with service that didn't match the invoice, he said. That's not public, but it's documented internally. He looked at Ethan. I want you to know I take the security of contractors working with the county seriously. I appreciate that, Ethan said. The meeting ran 2 hours. Victoria spoke during the open floor about Sterling Adaptive Technologies' business development in the county, the fleet arrangement with Callaway Auto, and the broader case for prioritizing local commercial relationships over regional chain providers in public contracts. She spoke without notes and without imprecision, and the room listened the way rooms listen to someone who knows the material and isn't pretending otherwise. Ethan spoke once, briefly, when the chair asked about the paratransit contract's first quarter performance. He gave the numbers, average turnaround time, cost per service, the one instance where a vehicle had required an extended repair window and how it had been handled, clean and specific. On the drive back, he called her. You prepared for that meeting, he said. I always prepare. You prepared specifically for tonight. The way you introduced me to Walsh before the session started. The order you brought up the county relationship in your remarks. A pause. Yes, she said. I mapped the room last week. Walsh's committee oversees zoning board appointments. Pruitt's internal documentation about Brennan gives us a narrative that doesn't require us to be the ones making the accusation. She paused. We just need to be visible and credible and let other people connect the dots. Is that how you've always operated? When the situation required it. Another pause. I learned early that when you're fighting from a position where you're perceived as having less standing because of who you are or how you got there or what you look like when you enter a room, you can't afford to be imprecise. You have to be twice as prepared and half as loud and let the work speak where your voice gets discounted. He thought about that. That's not entirely fair, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't, but it's functional, and I've found I care more about functional than fair most of the time. A pause. Fair is something you work toward. Functional is what gets you there. He pulled into the garage lot. The temporary board on the rear door was visible from the front, a reminder, plain and ugly, of the previous Friday night. He looked at it for a moment. "Victoria," he said. "Yeah." "The board came back on the zoning complaint today," he said. "Carla got the letter at 4. Complaint dismissed. Insufficient basis." A brief silence. "You didn't lead with that." "I wanted to see how the meeting went first." He turned off the truck. "The letter cites full compliance on all license conditions and notes that the complaint filer's corporate connection to a direct commercial competitor was a factor in the board's assessment." She was quiet for a long moment. "They put that in writing," she said. "They put that in writing," he confirmed. Another silence, and then she made a sound that was brief and controlled and unmistakably satisfying. The sound of someone who had built something carefully over weeks and was watching it hold. "That changes the picture for Brennan," she said. "If they try anything further, they're doing it against a documented background." "That's what I thought. But how do you feel?" He looked at the board on the rear door and the new cameras on the corners of the building and the parking lot that held 3 Sterling fleet vehicles and 2 paratransit units and 4 consumer cars that belonged to people who trusted him with things they needed to function. "Like someone tried to take something," he said, "and didn't." "Good answer," she said. He went inside. "What?" The replacement door frame went in that Thursday, installed by the same crew that had done the window work, and by Friday morning the rear of the building looked like it hadn't happened. The diagnostic screen arrived on schedule. Devin ran the first calibration check on it and reported it clean. Marcus mentioned the rear lot expansion again on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the meeting, leaning in the doorway of the office the same way he had in the spring. "You've been thinking about it," Marcus said. "For a while," Ethan said. "And?" Ethan looked at the second quarter numbers on the desk. He looked at the insurance claim that had been filed and partially resolved, and the incident report that was still technically open with the police and the zoning board letter that was now in a folder marked resolved in Carla's filing system. "I called the county planning office Monday," he said. "Asked about the permit process for a commercial expansion on an adjacent lot under existing ownership." He looked at Marcus. "It's a 6-month timeline minimum, 12 if there are environmental review triggers." Marcus was quiet. "I'm not saying no," Ethan said. "I'm saying I want the business stable for 2 full quarters before we take on a construction project. I want the security situation fully resolved. I want to know that what we've built is solid before we build more of it." Marcus looked at the office, the cracked chair, the calendar on the wall. "That's the right call," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "It's also the frustrating one. Raymond used to say..." I know what Raymond used to say. He'd heard it his whole childhood. You build the floor before you build the walls. His father had said it so often it had become invisible, the way things do when they're always present. He felt it now with more weight than he had before. Marcus left at 6. Devin and Becca had been gone since 5. Carla stayed until 6:30, finishing the month-end figures, and then gathered her thermos and her bag and stopped at the door of the office. "Month-end?" she said, setting the printout on the desk. He looked at the numbers. The third quarter was running 40% ahead of the same period the prior year, which was the year the garage had nearly closed. He sat there with it for a while. The phone rang at 7:15. He answered it because the after-hours line went to him, and he always answered it. It was Victoria. "I was going to call you in the morning," she said. "It's fine," he said. "Long day?" "Average day," he said. "Which is better than it sounds." She laughed, briefly, real. "Ethan," she said, and then paused in a way she didn't usually pause, like she was deciding something about the shape of what came next. "Yeah?" he said. "I've been doing this, the company, the work, all of it, for 7 years," she said. "And I've made a lot of decisions in that time. Some of them were good, and some of them were mistakes, and some of them I still don't know which they were." Another pause. "The decision in January, the contract, the arrangement, I knew at the time it was a good decision on the numbers. I knew it on the business logic. What I didn't factor was..." She stopped, and he could hear her working out the sentence, which was unusual. Victoria Sterling generally had her sentences constructed before she started them. "What?" he said. That it would be the best decision I'd made in a long time for reasons that had nothing to do with the numbers, she said. Her voice was quieter than usual, stripped of the professional register she wore like a second skin. I thought it was a business bet. It turned out to be something else. He sat in the cracked chair in the dark office with the month-end numbers in front of him and the calendar on the wall and the quiet garage around him. I know, he said. He said it the same way he said everything. Direct, without performance. And this time that plainness wasn't restraint. It was precision. The most accurate word for the thing he meant. The line was quiet between them for a moment. Not the quiet of an awkward pause, but the quiet of two people who had said what needed saying and were letting it exist without needing to do anything more with it yet. Outside, the lot was empty, and the cameras were running, and the new door on the back of the building was solid in its frame. And down the road, Gerald the Maple was dark against a sky going purple with the end of the day, full and unchanged and still exactly where it had always been. The county planning office approved the preliminary expansion permit on a Thursday morning in October, 11 months after Ethan had first sat across from Victoria Sterling in his father's office with a folder of bank statements and the particular quiet of a man who has run out of options and hasn't admitted it yet. He got the call from the planning office at 9:47, between a fleet service on one of the paratransit vans and a phone consultation with the contractor who was drawing up the site plan for the rear lot. He was standing in Bay 2 with Grease on his right hand and Devin working behind him on the van's rear brake assembly, and he listened to the permit officer's confirmation with the phone pressed to his ear and his eyes on the far wall where his father's old hand-painted sign still hung. Callaway Auto, quality you can trust. Since 1997, slightly faded, slightly crooked, and entirely unreplaceable. Thank you, he said when the officer finished. I'll have my contractor contact your office this week. He hung up and stood there for a moment. Good news? Devin asked without looking up from the brake assembly. Expansion permit came through, Ethan said. Devin set down his wrench. He looked at Ethan with the restrained expression of someone who had watched the previous 6 months. The vandalism, the zoning fight, the recovery, the grind of the third and fourth quarters, from close enough range to know what the permit actually meant. That's good news, Devin said. Yeah, Ethan said. He picked up his work and went back to it because that was the shape of good news in a place like this. You received it and you kept moving, and the celebration happened in the texture of the ordinary work that the good news made possible. He called Marcus first, then Carla, then Victoria. Victoria picked up on the second ring. I know, she said. Dana monitors the county planning board's approval list. It went up at 9:30. Of course she does, Ethan said. I thought you'd want to be the one to tell me, she said. So I was waiting for you to call. He leaned against the bay door frame in the October cold, looking at the rear lot through the side of the building, the cracked asphalt, the 2 dead trees that the contractor had already marked for removal, the space that was about to become something. We should talk about the site plan, he said. We should, she agreed, but not right now. What's right now? Right now you let it land, she said. You have a habit of moving to the next thing before the current thing has had a moment to exist. He was quiet. Did you call Sophie? Victoria asked. He hadn't. He'd called Marcus, then Carla, then her. He'd gone to operational contacts by instinct, which told him something he didn't particularly need spelled out. I'll call her after school, he said. She'll want to know, Victoria said. She's been asking about the permit since you filed the application. She told me about it when you brought her by last month. She used the word bureaucratic. Correctly, in context. She reads my work emails sometimes, Ethan said. I need to fix that. She's curious, Victoria said. That's not a thing to fix. A brief pause, and he could hear something warm in it that wasn't performance. Call her after school. He did. Sophie answered her cell phone, a device she'd received 3 months ago after a negotiation that had taken 2 weeks and involved a written proposal she'd prepared herself with bullet points, which Ethan had found both impressive and slightly alarming. On the third ring, with the slightly breathless quality of someone who had seen the caller ID and moved to somewhere with more privacy. Did it come through? She asked immediately. Just this morning, he said. A sound on her end that was brief and contained, the way Sophie was contained about things she cared about deeply. Not quiet because she didn't feel it, but quiet the way a vessel holds something rather than spills it. So we can build the new bays. 2 new bays, a service lane, and a customer waiting area that'll actually be comfortable. He'd promised her that last part months ago. The current waiting room was a folding chair and a coffee machine from 2008, and Sophie had described it accurately as depressing. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, Grandpa's garage is going to be okay." He was in the parking lot of the elementary school, pulled over across the street to make the call, and he sat there with her voice through the phone and the maple tree at the edge of his line of sight down the road, just visible in its October colors, the red and gold that came every year with the same quiet reliability. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The Brennan situation resolved itself in November, which was not a dramatic resolution, but the only kind available to situations built on intimidation rather than substance. What happened was this. Gerald Pruitt, the Transit Authority Operations Director, submitted a formal complaint to the County Business Practices Office, citing the documented pattern of incidents against Callaway Auto and the corporate trail connecting the zoning complaint to a Brennan-affiliated entity. Pruitt had been carrying that internal documentation about the prior contractor's mismatched invoices for over a year, and connecting it to the current situation gave him a reason to surface it. Commissioner Walsh's committee opened an administrative review of Brennan Automotive Group's commercial contract history with the county. The review was not explosive. There was no criminal finding, no public scandal, no single revelation that collapsed anything dramatically. What it found, in the precise and unglamorous language of administrative review, was a pattern of billing irregularities across 3 municipal contracts over 4 years. Charges for services not rendered, parts substitutions billed at original specification rates, labor hours that didn't match service records. Not fraud in the criminal sense, but the accumulation of small dishonesties that in aggregate paint a clear picture of a company that had decided its relationships protected it from accountability. Brennan's county contracts were not renewed. Ethan learned about the review's outcome from the county website's public posting, which Carla found on a Tuesday morning and printed and left on his desk without comment, because that was how Carla communicated things that mattered. He read it and put it in the same folder as the zoning board letter marked "Resolved," and went back to the alignment rack where a customer's minivan was waiting. That evening, Victoria called, and he told her. "Not the ending most people would write for it," she said. "What ending would they write?" "Something more visible," she said. "A courtroom, an apology, some kind of public accountability." "That's movies," he said. "The actual version is a county administrative finding that most people won't read and a company that loses some contracts and adjusts." He was in the office, the shop quiet behind him. "What matters is that it stopped." "It did stop," she said. "That's enough," he said. "I don't need it to be more than that." She was quiet for a moment. "I think that's something most people can't actually do," she said. "Accept a resolution that's real but not satisfying." "I've been doing this thing long enough," he said, "where I've learned the difference between wanting something to feel finished and something actually being finished. Years?" "Years," he agreed. "Long ones." She didn't ask which years because she already knew, not the specifics, but the general territory, the shape of the time he'd spent in places that required that kind of recalibration between the felt and the actual. She'd done her own version of it from a wheelchair in an office building, while a board of directors waited for her to fail quietly enough that they could manage the transition without disruption. Different years. Same lesson. Audit. Construction began on the rear lot expansion in January, exactly 1 year after the equipment installation that had started everything in motion. The contractor was a woman named Rosario Vega, who ran a 6-person crew and had built 3 commercial automotive facilities in the region, and who spoke about load-bearing concrete with the same precision that Devin spoke about adaptive brake systems. She and Ethan developed a rapport based almost entirely on their shared commitment to doing things in the correct sequence, regardless of schedule pressure, a quality that was rarer in construction than it should have been, and which Ethan recognized immediately as foundational. The 2 new bays went up over 9 weeks. The service lane took another 3. The waiting area, insulated walls, actual furniture, a coffee machine from this decade, a small play area in the corner that Sophie had been consulted about and had opinions on, was finished in April. Callaway Auto's grand reopening, Marcus's phrase, and not Ethan's, but accurate enough that Ethan let it stand, happened on a Saturday in late April that turned out to be warm and clear in the way of days that seemed to have been specifically allocated for moments like this. Mrs. Patel brought a pie. She brought two, actually, apple and cherry, and stood in the new waiting area looking around with the expression of someone doing complex emotional arithmetic, multiplying what was there now against what had been there before and finding the sum larger than expected. Raymond would have pretended not to be impressed, she told Ethan, holding both pies and looking at the new bay configuration through the glass. He would have found something to complain about, Ethan agreed. The sign, she said. He'd have said the sign was crooked. The new sign was straight. Ethan had checked it with a level 3 times. But he understood what she meant, and the understanding sat with him for the rest of the day in a way that wasn't sad exactly. More like the feeling of carrying something that had weight, but was the right weight, the kind you'd choose to carry even knowing what it costs. Victoria came in the afternoon with Dana and 2 members of her facilities team who were there to conduct the initial onboarding inspection for the expanded fleet service schedule. She was practical about it. This was a business event, and she treated it as one. But when the inspection was done and Dana had taken the facilities team back to the office, she found Ethan in Bay 4, the newest one, where nothing had been serviced yet, and the concrete still held the pale, clean color of fresh installation. She looked at the bay. The lift, calibrated and tested but not yet used. The tool organization along the wall that Marcus had set up according to his system, which had by now become the system for the whole shop. The sight lines to the other bays through the interior windows. Your father built the original, she said, with second-hand tools and a hydraulic lift that squealed every time it went up. Ethan looked at the new lift. He'd have had opinions about this one. Good opinions? He'd have checked every weld. He paused. Then yes. She turned from the bay and looked at him the way she sometimes did, directly, with that quality of attention that didn't flinch from what it found. He'd gotten used to it over the past year and a half. He still noticed it every time. I want to show you something, she said. She opened the leather portfolio she'd brought in. The same one, he thought, or one exactly like it, as the one she'd had on that first Thursday morning in this office, and took out a single document. He looked at it. It was a proposal. Not a business contract. A different kind of document, less formal in structure, more detailed in vision. A 2-page outline for an initiative called the Regional Business Recovery Program, a joint effort between Sterling Adaptive Technologies and Callaway Auto to identify struggling small businesses in the county and surrounding region, provide low-interest capital access, operational consulting, and where relevant direct commercial contract relationships that could stabilize their revenue base. He read it twice. He read the section headings and the projected scope, 12 to 15 businesses in the first year, and the funding structure, which combined Sterling's investment capacity with a county small business development grant that Victoria had apparently already begun the application for. You wrote this last week, he said. I started writing it in February, she said. I finished it last week. February? He looked at her. That was before the expansion was approved. I knew the expansion was going to be approved, she said. The question was never whether the garage was viable. The question was whether you'd want to do something larger with what you'd built once it was stable. And you decided I would. I decided I didn't know, she said, which was more honest and therefore more like her. I wrote it in case. He looked back at the document. The section at the bottom outlined the operational model. Ethan's role as a field consultant, someone who'd been through the actual experience of rebuilding a failing business under real constraints. Not a theorist, but a practitioner, paired with Sterling's capital and network. You're asking me to help other people do what we did, he said. I'm asking if you want to, she said. The garage runs itself now. You have Marcus and Devin and Becca and Carla, and the systems are solid. You have capacity you didn't have a year ago. The expansion just opened. I know. She didn't argue with the timeline. I'm not asking you to start tomorrow. I'm asking you to read it and think about it. He read it again, the whole thing, standing in the new bay with the late April light coming through the high windows. He thought about the owner of the garage across the county line he'd heard about through the parts supplier network, the one running on equipment older than his father's had been when Raymond bought it secondhand. He thought about the woman who ran the adaptive equipment repair shop in the next town, who'd lost her primary supplier contract and hadn't found a replacement. He thought about the version of himself that had spread bank statements across a table at Mel's diner and told a stranger the numbers because she'd asked a direct question and he'd been too tired to perform optimism he didn't feel. He thought about what it would have meant if someone had shown up then, not with charity, but with a plan. "I'll need to understand the funding structure better," he said, "the grant timeline and the capital commitment ratios." "I can walk you through it," she said. "Or Sandra can. She's already reviewed the legal framework." He looked at her. "You had Sandra review it." "Preliminary review only," she said, with the particular composure of someone who has prepared thoroughly and is not embarrassed about it. "Nothing binding until you say yes. And if I say no? Then I find a different operational partner and the program takes longer to launch and is probably less effective." She held his gaze. "But I don't think you're going to say no." He looked at the document one more time. He thought about Sophie, who had asked about the permit with the word bureaucratic and who had opinions about play corners, and who had looked up Victoria Sterling on the school library computer and reported that she had a Wikipedia page. He thought about Marcus, who had said the right call was also the frustrating one, and about Devon recalibrating a brake system with the patience of someone who understood that the quality of the work was not negotiable. He thought about Carla's yellow sticky note still in the top drawer of his desk. "Your father would be insufferable about this." Underlined once. He thought about a freezing November morning and a woman who wanted 5 quiet minutes and got something different, and a man who had decided without thinking about it that he couldn't sit still while someone else absorbed something they didn't deserve, and how the smallest unremarkable decision to stand up had set off a chain of events that led here to a new bay with clean concrete and good light, on a warm April afternoon with a proposal in his hands and a future that looked different from what either of them had expected. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She said it simply, without the particular inflection of triumph, because Victoria Sterling was not the kind of person who performed winning. She was the kind of person who confirmed the next step and got to work. Sophie met Victoria for the first time that evening, at the diner. Not Mel's, a different one, closer to the school, with booths that had more room and a menu that Sophie had already vetted for the presence of the grilled cheese she considered the benchmark of a restaurant's basic competence. Ethan had been somewhat formal about proposing it, which Sophie had noticed and commented on by saying, at breakfast, "Dad, you're being weird. I've talked to her on the phone 3 times. That's different from meeting in person." "Is it?" He didn't have a good answer for that, so he let it go. They arrived before Victoria, which was unusual. Victoria was constitutionally early, but she'd had a late call that Dana had warned Ethan about by text at 4:30. Sophie was already reading the menu when Victoria came through the door at 6:12. Ethan watched Sophie look up. He didn't know exactly what Sophie had been expecting. The Wikipedia page probably hadn't prepared her for the specifics. But whatever she'd been expecting, what she did when Victoria reached the table and said hello was look at her with the direct, serious attention that Sophie applied to people she was genuinely uncertain about and hadn't yet placed into a category. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hi," Victoria said. "You must be Sophie." "Yeah." Sophie looked at the wheelchair for a moment. Not the complicated look that adults performed, the careful averting and then the pointed not averting, but the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had questions and was deciding whether to ask them. "Does it have a name?" Victoria blinked once. Ethan felt the particular parental wariness of not knowing what was coming. "The chair?" Victoria said. "Yeah, our tree's named Gerald. Our car doesn't have a name, but Dad's truck is kind of named Dad's truck, which isn't a good name, but it stuck." She turned back to the menu. "You don't have to name it if you don't want to. I was just asking." "I haven't named it," Victoria said, settling at the table end. "What would you suggest?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to vocabulary sentences and chess moves. "Something practical," she said finally, "like a tool would have. Not like a pet. Then probably not Gerald. Gerald works for a tree, Sophie said. Trees are slow. Chairs should be faster. That's a reasonable distinction, Victoria said. Ethan looked at his menu and said nothing. Dinner was an hour and 20 minutes, which was longer than Ethan had estimated, and which involved Sophie explaining, at moderate length, the rules of the chess game she was learning from Marcus, the administrative injustice of her school's homework policy regarding weekends, and the specific structural reasons why the grilled cheese at this diner was adequate but not exceptional. Victoria engaged all three topics with the same focused attention she brought to balance sheets and zoning board responses, and Sophie received this as entirely normal because Sophie had never understood why adults were supposed to be less interested in the things children cared about. At one point, Sophie asked, without particular preamble, "Did it hurt when it happened, the accident?" Ethan started to intercept this and stopped himself because the question was asked without cruelty and with the genuine curiosity of someone who wanted to understand rather than to pry, and he thought Victoria could decide for herself how to handle it. "Yes," Victoria said, "for a while after, more than during. Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes, not the way it used to." Sophie nodded, satisfied by the directness of this. "My dad's shoulder hurts when it's cold. He doesn't say anything about it, but I can tell because he moves differently." "Sophie," Ethan said. "It's true," she said, unrepentant. "She should know things that are true." Victoria looked at Ethan with the edge of something in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. "She's right," she said. "I should." He looked at his daughter, who was already back on the menu, considering dessert with her characteristic analytical gravity, and he thought about all the things you don't plan for when you're trying to build something. The moments that arrive sideways, undramatic and specific, that turn out to be the ones you remember. The Regional Business Recovery Program launched in September. The first cohort was 11 businesses. A bakery in Millhaven, whose owner had been carrying equipment debt for 6 years and turning down wholesale contracts because she couldn't meet the volume. A small HVAC company, run by a veteran who had the skills but not the operational infrastructure. A clothing alteration shop that had 3 loyal decades of customers and a lease situation that was about to end badly. A hardware store. A landscaping company. An adaptive sports equipment repair shop. That one had been Victoria's personal addition to the list, found through her own network. Ethan visited each one before the program launched. He drove out to them in his truck, the one that was kind of named Dad's truck, and sat with the owners for an hour and looked at their numbers and asked the same kind of questions Victoria had asked him, the ones that cut to the actual problem rather than the stated problem. Some of them were defensive at first. He understood that. He'd sat in his father's office and spread his own statements across the desk for a stranger, and it had taken a particular quality of tiredness to do it, the kind where the performance of being fine costs more than you have left. He didn't tell them his story at the beginning. He let them talk, and he listened, and when they ran out of talk, he asked the next question. By the end of each visit, he'd usually told them enough that they understood he wasn't operating from theory. "You were in the same position," the bakery owner said. Her name was Diane, and she'd been running her shop for 19 years, and she looked at Ethan across her work table with the wariness of someone who had been offered help before in forms that cost more than they gave. "Worse position, actually," he said. "I had equipment that was 30 years old and a competitor who was filing zoning complaints against me." "What changed?" "Someone showed up and asked the right questions," he said, "and then did something about the answers." She looked at him for a long moment. "And that's what this is." "That's what we're trying to make it," he said. He didn't promise her more than that, because overclaiming was the thing that eroded trust before it had a chance to form, and trust was the only actual currency the program ran on. "We can show you the numbers. After that, you decide." She joined the cohort. 7 of the 11 businesses hit their first quarter stabilization targets. 2 were ahead of projection. 2 were behind, and Ethan spent more time with those 2. Not because the program required it, but because he understood that the businesses that were struggling within the program were the ones where the problems ran deeper than capital, where the operational dysfunction was rooted in something that money didn't fix. He worked through it with them the way you work through a transmission that has more wrong with it than the original diagnosis showed, methodically, without rushing the timeline, and with the honesty to say when something needed to be rebuilt rather than repaired. One of those two stabilized by the second quarter. The other closed, and the owner called Ethan when it happened and said, "I know this isn't what we wanted." And Ethan said, "I know," and didn't say anything false about how it was going to be okay, because sometimes things weren't okay, and the most decent thing you could do was stay on the line and not pretend otherwise. He told Victoria about that call the same evening. "You're carrying it," she said. "A little," he said. "Yeah. That's not a flaw," she said. "That's what makes you good at this." "It doesn't feel like a quality," he said. "It feels like a weight." "Things worth doing usually do," she said, and she said it without the inspirational uplift that those words could carry when said badly. Said it the way she said most things, plainly, as an observation about how life worked, rather than as encouragement, which made it truer than encouragement would have been. So, a year after the program launched, they sat at a table in Ethan's new waiting room, the comfortable one, with furniture Sophie had approved, going through the second-year planning documents. It was a Saturday afternoon in September, and the shop was closed, and the light through the front windows was the particular warm angle of early fall that made everything look slightly more resolved than it was. Sophie was in the break room, ostensibly doing homework and actually also playing chess against a tutorial app on the school tablet, which she was winning with a regularity she was trying not to be insufferably smug about. Marcus had come in to check on a van that he'd been tracking and had not left, the way Marcus didn't leave when there was work in the building, and was now in Bay 1, doing something to the van that he'd said would take 20 minutes and had already taken an hour. Carla's second-year projection was on the table between them. It showed the program at full capacity. 15 businesses, 2 more counties, a second cohort coordinator Ethan had hired 3 months ago, a young woman named Priya who had an MBA and the uncommon quality of knowing what she didn't know. Ethan looked at the numbers and thought about $14,231, the gap he'd been trying to close when he sat in Mel's diner with his coffee and his bank statements and his green canvas jacket, the one with the sleeve zipper, the one Sophie had saved her lunch money for. He still wore it. The left sleeve zipper had broken in the spring, and he'd had a cobbler resew it, which was not particularly cost-effective for a work jacket, but which he hadn't been able to bring himself to replace. Victoria noticed him looking at something she couldn't see. "Where are you?" she asked. "November before last," he said. Mel's diner." She looked at him. She knew what that morning had been. He'd told her in pieces over the months, the actual state of things, the sleeplessness, the numbers. She'd told him her version of that same morning, the specific quality of sitting in a public space and waiting for something you'd learned to wait for while presenting the face of someone who was fine. "Long way from there," she said. 11 months felt like 3 years, he said, in both directions. It felt like a long time and also like almost no time. "That's how it works when things are actually happening," she said. "Time compresses." He looked at her across the table, the projection documents between them, the sound of Marcus in the bay, Sophie's muffled voice from the break room saying something triumphant to the chess app. He looked at her the way he'd learned to look at things he valued, directly, without performing indifference. "Victoria," he said. "Yeah. I need to say something that's outside the business context." She looked at him without moving. She had the stillness she always had when something required it. Not tension, just presence. The quality of someone who has learned that holding still is sometimes the most active thing you can do. "Okay," she said. "I'm not good at this," he said. "The saying things part. I've always been better at the doing." "I know," she said. "You've been doing things for a year and a half." "That's not nothing," he said. "It's a lot," she said. "But I want to say it directly," he said, because he was a man who had learned that directness was the only form of honesty that actually functioned, the only version that didn't leave room for the other person to fill in the blanks incorrectly. "I didn't know what I was walking into when you called the garage that first Thursday. I thought it was a business arrangement." "It started as one," she said. "It turned into something I didn't have a name for," he said. "For a while. Now I think I do." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to be something we're not," he said. "I'm asking if you want to figure out what that is, properly, outside the Wednesday calls and the program documents." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her running through her own version of the calculation. Not coldly, but in the way of a person who has been responsible for so much for so long that they do not make decisions lightly, not even the ones they've already made. I've wanted to answer that question for a while, she said. I was waiting for you to ask it. I know I was slow, he said. You were careful, she said. I understood that. In the break room, Sophie said something else to the chess app, louder this time, with the unmistakable cadence of someone who has captured a major piece and is not entirely containing their satisfaction about it. Victoria looked in the direction of the sound and then back at Ethan, and the thing that happened to her face was not quite a smile, but it had all the qualities of one, real, involuntary, warm in a way that didn't perform warmth but simply was it. She's going to be insufferable when she beats Marcus, Victoria said. She's going to be insufferable before she beats him, Ethan said. She's already insufferable about the app. She gets it from someone, Victoria said. Not from me, Ethan said. You've met yourself, right? He looked at her. She looked back at him. Outside, the September light moved on the front windows, that specific amber of the turning year, and in the shop behind them, Marcus's wrench found a bolt that had been resisting, and the van made a small sound of mechanical surrender, and in the break room, Sophie announced her victory to no one in particular. The garage on the corner of Route 9 and Miller Road, Callaway. Auto, quality you can trust. Since 1997. Sat solid in the afternoon light, 4 bays now instead of 2. The rear lot extension still clean and new smelling, the sign straight and the lot full. The whole thing built out of debt and stubbornness and the specific kindness of a morning when one person decided not to look the other way. Some things you build with your hands, some things you build by showing up, day after day, in the quiet and unremarkable way that ends up meaning everything to the people who needed you to show up. The garage was both. The program was both. And the thing that was forming across the table, between 2 imperfect people who had been carrying their separate weights long enough to know the difference between someone who would help you carry yours and someone who would pretend not to see it, that was both too. It wasn't a clean ending. Clean endings were for people who hadn't lived enough to know that the real ones come without fanfare, in the middle of ordinary Saturdays, with grease still on someone's hands and a kid yelling about chess in the next room and more work coming Monday that you'll handle the same way you handled the last thing. And the thing before that? One decision at a time, with as much honesty as you can manage and enough stubbornness to stay when it gets hard. That's the whole of it. That's how broken things get rebuilt.